All right, well, let's get right into it. All right, so I got my buddy Joe on here today. Joe Henry, right? That's your last name, right?
That's it.
We never really talked about it much.
Like, when you meet each other, it's all first names for a long time. It's like, what is your last name?
All right, so we got Joe on here, and he's got really interesting stuff going on in all kinds of different realms of art and travel across the world, military experience, and then he also brought me some coffee. So explain to what's going on with the coffee first.
So I was watching a previous episode of yours, and I come to find out you're a coffee connoisseur as well.
Yes.
So I went ahead and whipped up a batch of Bolivia, single origin. Give it a try.
Yeah. I'm excited for this. Even like a fancy cup. Oh, that's really smooth.
Right?
That is really smooth compared to the old Kirkland brand.
It's going to have a kick to it, too. So we sit here, we're pretty wired up. We can blame Bolivia for this one.
Okay, we'll blame Bolivia. They don't get enough heat, I don't think so. They can be blamed for the good coffee. Is that a common origin?
Yeah, a lot of the coffee prints like South America, Africa.
You've been around to a lot of those places anyways, so that's kind of cool
try
in
to sample
itself.
the coffee when you're there.
Yeah, I know like Cuban coffee is big in Florida, like Miami area. If you go for like a Cuban blend, it's like that's where it like knocks you out basically, like knocks you on your feet, knocks you off your feet type of thing.
That's one of those things I remember like when I first moved out here, we were doing all this work in the Keys, and that's when you go from all the Cuban influence down there.
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, you want a Cubano or a Cuban coffee or a sandwich with it? Cuban coffee. I was like, yeah, sure. And was not expecting how much sugar is in Cuban coffee.
Yep.
Oh my gosh. You'd ask for half sweetness and you're still getting rocked.
Yeah, so me and yours is black as well. I mean, I always tell people that's the only right way to have coffee is.
But hey, the best conversations are had over a cup of coffee.
Yes.
So.
No cream, no sugar, just black coffee. I mean, I drink an excessive amount. Bronte gets on me because I drink like a pot almost every day.
So is Kristen. I do 2 a day.
I'm like, it's so much water. It's my water intake for the day. Yeah. She doesn't like that argument.
That's the exact opposite of what you should be doing.
I try to drink salt water in the morning to help with the counterbalance of dehydration of the coffee.
Maintain some of your water.
Yes. Yeah. So the salt water first thing, tall glass salt water first thing in the morning helps the lack of jitters because you're not dehydrated as much. But I don't really know. I'm not smart enough to really know.
For me, it's completely unhealthy. It's completely just caffeine to maintain all the hobbies and activities and things going on.
Yeah.
And then water is an afterthought when your body finally reminds you.
So you get it full bean, you grind it from.
Yeah. So this stuff, we get on a subscription. So you get the coffee within probably 2 to 3 days of being roasted. And then it's just probably like the freshest you can have it.
Yeah.
If you're not actually sitting out there taking it straight from the machine. But
dang.
Yeah, you get used to the power of it and it's hard to go back.
I know. It's kind of like, it's like having like a strong energy drink and then going to a weaker one.
So
all of a sudden
have to go
you're
to the
like
bathroom like twice during
drowsy.
the show.
Yeah, it's a small one, thankfully. So it's not like I'm guzzling, 20 ounces of coffee here. That should help a little bit. So you're getting ready to go overseas though, right? That's what I wanted to hear about.
So this trip though that's coming up here, which is why we had to kind of get this together this week.
Yeah.
Is actually probably one of the first times I'm going on a trip just for fun, actually. So one of my good friends that I was in the Marine Corps with is getting married in Bali, Indonesia. And I've done some work out there before, but this is purely a fun trip. So Indonesia will be for his wedding. And then shortly after that, we're waiting on some grants to come through, and that will be Malaysia again. So that's kind of where most of my work is happening right now.
Yeah, the grant stuff is really interesting. We talked a little bit about that. I know no side of the scientific grant world
where it's the biggest pain of it all.
Applying to get monies from not even just the U.S. government, which surprised me.
Yeah. To
research reefs, right?
Yeah.
So you have your history, your background in coral studies, right?
Correct. So it's what brought me out here. So I did my undergraduate studies in biology, natural sciences, and then took a little break, went into the military for 8 years. We'll probably get into that a little bit later.
Just a little break.
Because it doesn't make any sense to anybody, It's like, oh, you're working towards being we just say marine biologist. It's probably the simplest way of saying it. And then I take an 8-year break in the Navy, Marine Corps, and come back. And as I got out, I was given an opportunity to come out here to do my PhD at the University of Florida. And it's like, why not? You can't really study reefs in California, you can, but we got them right off our coast here. So
Yeah.
It's a nice place to be. And so that's what brought me out here, is to do my PhD specifically in kind of how we improve coral restoration. So kind of like, we've talked a little about some of the issues surrounding there, which I'm sure we'll get into more later.
No, I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah.
I mean, we could go right into it because that's what we're here for. I want to hear about the Reef stuff, and then also about how the climate is affecting it, because climate is huge in automotive right now.
Yeah.
Like climate change and the government attack is destroying the automotive industry. And I think a lot of your research is actually probably either supporting or negating what they're saying about what our automotive industry does.
Yeah, see, that's where I'm this guy that kind of sits in this middle. It's like, hey, I'm a huge car guy. You're like, I've been building cars since.
We're going to get you a drift car this week.
Like, we're literally going to get a drift car this week. We've got multiple cars at the house, and then there's this other side of me that's all about like reef restoration and oceanic type research and stuff like that. So I definitely these two hobbies definitely kind of conflict with each other in certain areas. So yeah, that's a tough point for me. Well, we love what we love, I guess, and it's a hard thing to.
Yeah, and I don't expect anything to kind of you say something incorrect in either world to support your own interest. I just hope that the people that read the data interpret it correctly. That's always my worry.
Yeah, and that's where you just, you have to be honest with it, and that's what it is. And a lot of this just comes down to like personal self questions too, of just who, just like a human nature type situation where it's like, I am super passionate about these cars and building these things, but at the same time, some of these cars in the industry is leading to issues in another area I'm really passionate about. So there is conflict in me, and so part of me has found my balance, I guess, in trying to contribute to make a difference in that field. So with globally, there's maybe not aware, there's a lot of issues we're having with coral reefs and other systems based on how the climate's changing. And whether we talk about the nature of why that's happening, we are seeing these big changes. And Florida is really just on the front of seeing some of the worst of it. So here in Florida, we're the only part of the continental United States that we have barrier reefs. There's reefs in Hawaii, but if you talk about the United States, we have this fairly extensive reef tract that goes all the way down the coast of Florida, down the Keys. And that's a reef tract we've seen disappear over the last probably 25 to 30 years. So you'd imagine this was an area that was just covered with coral, reef. It's a huge habitat for fish and other things that rely on it. And we've lost probably around 98% of it in just these last 20, 25 years. So it's been
25% in 25 years, roughly.
Or it's probably more than that. It's like these, I started studying this 10 years ago, and I'm probably saying those numbers.
Yeah.
And they slowly changed, so it's now probably closer to 30s. But you can start to say in the 80s, we started to see large declines here in the Keys. And I don't know if you've ever seen or snorkeled or scuba dived or been on a reef before, or specifically the Keys.
I've been around them a little bit in the Keys, not too much, very resorty type. And I've been around a lot of cold water mostly. So we don't get the tropical reefs up where I'm at on Long Island. We get more
That's
just
true.
like
not a whole lot going
kelp.
on up there. Yeah. But hey, those are still cool though.
They're cool, but they're way different than
Very different.
your tropical, beautiful reefs that you get on the Keys area. But yeah, what were you saying?
So it's kind of, and it's one of those things that's hard to kind of imagine how much has changed, because it is an environment that's really out of sight, out of mind. It's not something you see every day, and it doesn't impact you maybe on a daily basis. It's not like looking out here and seeing some of the forest being cleared for houses, because it's pretty obvious that's happening kind of out of sight. And when you imagine what 98% decline looks like, it's basically just the reefs out there have just been so heavily degraded.
Can you use overhead camera a lot to see the difference? Because in New York, the water's so murky, you can't really see what's going on. You get 25-foot visibility, hopefully.
Yeah.
But down here, you probably get 100-foot visibility.
I tell people I've been diving all over the world for a lot of my life, and the Keys is still one of my favorite places in the world to go diving. It's special, and some of the stuff you'll see there, and it really is just a beautiful place. So when I think about the Florida Keys, it really is a like a national monument here in the States, the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. And it's really is a treasure here for just people that live in the U.S. to get to come see and experience. So I hate it when I tell my family to get down there as soon as they can, because the state you see it in today is probably better than what it's going to be in 10 years. So
it's like an actual pressing issue.
It's a
of
huge
like
pressing issue that the state's pouring a lot more funds into to actually try and address this. Like recently, what was it? This, which is also kind of a daunting thing to talk about when you start saying numbers and like timelines.
Yeah.
Because this gets people. It's the proposal that NOAA came out with, the governing body, the federal side of the things that oversees a lot of the oceanic stuff off our coast and the reefs here. They put this proposal forward that basically said this is what it's going to take to address the problems we're having here in the Florida Keys. And it was something wild like $200 million over the course of 100 years. And 200 million, may not seem like that much. I actually may be underquoting that if I'm, I think it was around there, and 100 years plus to actually address this problem. And even then, things won't really get back to the place they were. And you start telling people things like that, well, so you're telling me the problem we can't even fix like in our timeline of my kids and like my life and my kids? And that's kind of something too that, you're doing things that are going to impact generations forward. So it's a pay it forward type situation.
And it's tough for a politician to think about anything that's past 4 or 8 years or even 16 years, because that's a completely different realm.
Exactly.
You can't really make plans for 10 governors down the road, because that's going to go out the window pretty quickly. And then storms, like the storms in Florida, could ruin all of that work pretty quickly. I mean, we were talking about what they're doing on the Skyway. They're putting all those artificial reefs. Like, there's, probably 100 of them sitting there ready to go in the water that they've been making out of concrete.
Yeah.
And growing up, I've seen a lot of Army Corps of Engineers come in and try to like save erosion places and like put sand and pump sand. And it always it's like this massive project. And in a year, you don't even see what they did.
Yeah, and you're right. There's this point where you want to be able to, especially like in politics, you want to be able to show like you took an action that had a immediate show, it showed an impact. And I said a lot of these things, corals, I don't know how much you know about them. Like these are like living animals. They look like rocks, but they're really a colonial animal. It's related to jellyfish. They can either split themselves to make a new one, or they can like sexually reproduce. But you look at this thing that looks like a rock in the water. It's actually a colony of thousands and thousands of individuals living together. So that's why get these really extensive reefs that are just these massive living things. So a reef isn't really interesting because it's an active living thing that's actually creating the habitat, So, and that's not something you just get to replace overnight. It's some of these corals that we've had down there, they're thousands of years old. And we've had coral reefs down here for like hundreds of thousands of years.
Can you one's, 200 feet away, can you do they really still like a tree almost, like something happened at one root? And
so they can, they'll split, which, it's kind of cool.
Plant
actually.
Almost?
We got some show and tell.
Oh, okay. I'm in.
So a few things are brought.
Yeah, we got right into the coral reefs discussion because that's a very interesting one to me.
Yeah, it's not something you probably,
I don't know all that many people that know much about it.
All right, so what we have here,
okay.
This is a staghorn coral skeleton. So here in Florida we have, not compared to the Indo-Pacific, we don't have that many coral species, but we do have quite a few, and this is probably one of the main ones that we used to have in its most abundant here in the Keys. Mm-hmm. So this and probably elkhorn coral were probably two of the most dominant corals that we used to have, and these are the ones that have gone by almost 98%, and these are the ones that they get together and form massive thickets, like bigger than this room.
Yeah.
Colonies intertwined together.
And are these the ones that like other ones hook onto? I guess or like other kind of stuff, and
yeah,
I guess. I'm thinking of like animals living in this as well.
Exactly.
All the little fish that you see, like Finding Nemo, like fish living in the coral. and how, like, would they play a massive role in keeping this like up, like a symbiotic relationship, I guess you could say, like.
Yeah. So so this I mean, this is a really small one. This is actually one I grew in the lab. So part of my research was growing them in land-based facilities and seeing how they would perform once taken back out into the ocean, and that was kind of part of my PhD research. And so this is one that I grew in the lab that didn't make it back out in the field, so I brought it back with me. But you can imagine this coral here is maybe about a year and a half old, but it will get, and when it's healthy, these things are massive.
So it took a year and a half to grow like that,
right,
to that size,
and that's actually pretty quick. In the lab they have some pretty ideal conditions we expose them to, but they can go pretty quickly in the wild as well. But you can imagine, kind of like what you just noticed, is just how kind of complicated this structure is, with the corals. They create all this habitat, and that's kind of one of the big things, the value that they provide is they create this network of complex habitat that juvenile fish and other things need for their home. So when we talk about other associated issues here in Florida, you'll see the impacts on the fishing industry. You don't have as many fish because this is where the juvenile fish get their start. When you lose the habitat, it's a trickle-down effect. So you lose the habitat, you lose the habitat for the juvenile fish to grow up in, and then the other things that maybe like the sharks, the things that come in, like, there's not as much fish there, we'll stop seeing the sharks, or just really cascading effects on different parts of that whole complex.
So would that, shark attacks are pretty rampant in Florida, and I think this time of year there's, like, I've seen some videos of like hammerheads and stuff.
Yeah.
Less of this means they're probably coming more to where people would be, because there's less fish and less coral for those big sharks to kind of hang around at and try to get fish. So then they come into shore.
Yeah. So, I mean, Florida's just a super sharky place to begin with.
Yeah.
So, that's one fun thing about here.
I think like 2 different beaches in Florida are like 1 and 2 for shark attacks.
Shark bite capitals of the world.
Yeah. I think it's Clearwater Beach is pretty high up there. And then on the other coast, Valrico area, or one of those on the other coast of Florida is pretty high. But yeah.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so you can see, like, looking at that one, you notice all those little cup looking things. Mm-hmm. So those are called corallites, and that's the individual coral that I talked about. And so every single one of those little thumbs that comes off of that is an individual that can break off and then form a new colony at some point. So yeah, so if you kind of picture the big picture, this is like how important these things are for building structure. And then the kind of issues we're having right now, kind of what you hit on, you're talking about maybe some of the things that actually help to secure these things to the floor. Because these things, they'll naturally cement themselves down as they grow and they calcify. Because a lot of the reef that we have here, it is just corals on top of coral. Like all that calcium carbonate sea floor is really just get like corals that have died or grown on top of each other over time and form the entire like Florida reef track.
So it's just stacks, basically,
stacks
just piles
and stacks
of it.
Of corals. And
so what's killing it, though, do you think? The higher temperatures or more pollution?
Yeah, it's, obviously like the issues we're having with higher temperatures in our water is a huge stressor. And what we're seeing typically is like, nothing really happens in a vacuum. It's hard to say. It's just like these one things. Corals specifically these ones can be very low tolerance to any type of change. So I would say it's like it's a multitude of factors that are kind of coming in and impacting the corals that are causing the issues we're having here. So one of them is definitely pollution. Florida is a giant watershed as things kind of come through the center of the state, sweep south through the Everglades and then into the Keys, and we just get those really high nutrient waters from that. Whereas corals tend to like really nutrient poor water, so pretty clear, not a lot of nutrients in the water. And so when you get a lot of nutrients in the water, that can stress them out. And then also you combine that with like high temperatures, another stressor, and it just kind of, they stack until the corals hit their tipping point. And one thing that makes corals really interesting, which kind of how these things tie in, is they're symbionts. So corals have this this algae that lives with them in their tissue. So it's a symbiotic relationship. The coral provides the house basically, and the algae that lives inside, along with a whole suite of other microorganisms, actually provide a lot of the food for the coral. So just like they have these plants that live in their tissue that photosynthesize the sun,
Yeah.
which results in the sugars from that process, and that provides foods for the corals. So when it gets really hot, high temperatures, high light intensity, this algae that lives inside of them just decides like, this is too much, I'm out of here, and they leave. And that's called coral bleaching. So that's probably something you've heard a lot about on the news or just on the internet before is bleaching. Yep. And so a coral will look clear, and when it kind of look like this when it bleaches. But it has that color, all the colors that coral have is because of the algae that lives in their tissue. So when they get stressed out and the corals and the algae leaves, you get left with this white skeleton looking thing, and that's a bleached coral.
So what color was this originally then? Was it always white, or was it like
healthy? They're an orangish brown color. And so corals can, if conditions are right, they can recover and get that algae back. But usually it's like a death sentence. It's like once they fully bleach, it's really high likelihood they're not gonna make it.
So without this is probably also what protected Florida coast from storms as well.
Right.
Like with less coral kind of stopping the big waves from coming in as hard.
Shoot, cool. I think you read up on this before I even came on the show, man.
No, I've always I actually didn't do any research. It
was good.
You would think.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right.
But I've always been interested in the ocean and all that stuff, and the ocean always to me was like growing up on it. I always watched so much ocean preservation and we got to save the dunes and stuff because the ocean waves, and we'd put rocks and stuff. And it always felt so useless to me because the ocean was just so powerful that we would spend
it would Jeff take Goldblum, life finds a way.
It would take a month to put a bunch of rocks on the coastline, and then a storm would take them all away like that. And I was just like, this is so useless. The ocean is so much stronger than our freaking stupid bulldozers.
Yeah, and that's that's kind of what you hear is most common is let's just put some artificial structures out there as reefs or as wave breaks, natural barriers. And there is more research going on that here in Florida specifically. But that's one of the biggest things that corals provided is these reefs were natural storm breaks for the coast. So now the Keys and the eastern coast of Florida, which had these massive reef networks, now loses their first protection barrier from this big storm activity. So with that stuff gone, just the coastline, there's more coastal erosion. I think if you head south of, I don't know Florida super well, was north of Miami, south of Port St. Lucie or some of that area, you'll start to see coastline where the houses are just chipped away.
Yep.
And the coast is taken off. And, it's just the natural storm protection that the corals provided is not there anymore. So now we're trying to figure out how to replace that function.
So this probably isn't even time frame wise, but do you see it popping up anywhere new? So Florida may have gotten too hot, but maybe the coast of Georgia or North Carolina or South Carolina, it starts to pop up there because now that water is ripe for coral, or is it just not even long enough at this point?
Are you sorry as far as or would we start seeing coral start to
blooms? Yeah, starting to work its way north.
Probably not. So one of the big issues we're having here in Florida is the populations are so low, they can't reproduce on their own pretty much anymore. Because, man, we're talking some serious coral on this show right now.
I know.
This is.
Hopefully you guys are interested. The first 20 minutes have been.
If you have a coffee conversation at home about corals, this is getting deep.
Yeah. If you live in Florida, this is probably interesting.
So corals, they can fragment themselves, and you imagine a storm, it breaks a piece off, it rolls down, wedges itself in a piece of rock, and then it grows into a new colony. That's one way it reproduces. But the sexual propagation where they actually spawn. So these corals will be male and female, where they'll have these egg bundles that will go up, they'll release once a year. So you can imagine this is kind of a big ordeal. So once a year, it's the first full moon in August. Oh, every coral has a broadcast spawning event. And it's by species. So it's we've got this timed out pretty well now, but it's first full moon in August at 2 hours past the sun, the moon, moonrise, all the corals spawn at the same time. It's a pretty amazing thing. So we've kind of learned that corals have a lunar, solar, temporal trigger to actually spawn.
Interesting.
And so coming kind of back to what that means is so when they spawn, they release all these eggs up into the water column and they drift. And so they'll fertilize on the water surface, drift to a different location, settle down as like a newly fertilized coral and then grow a new colony. But the issue being now is that, they don't want to self-fertilize. Like that's not good. You need to be able to mix with.
So it gets like a little diversity
you need
in the bloodline.
Like, because, genetics 101, it's not good to be having kids with your sister. Like, we've learned that doesn't end well down the line. Problems start arising. It's the same thing with corals. You want to mix. But you can imagine that back in the day when there was tens of thousands of different, think of like, we say genotypes, or like different individuals, like you and I are a different genotype, Say back in the day there was tens of thousands of different ones. Now I think we're down to, I think it was like a few years ago we were down to like 52 in the Keys. So like imagine if it was really low. Imagine like only 50 people left in your population in your area, and you're all spread out. And so you spawn in St. Augustine. There's no corals up in St. You spawn there off Miami, but the only other one closer to you is all the way down in like Marathon. They're never going to get together. And so we call that like functionally, they cannot actually reproduce in the wild anymore because they can't actually meet up. So the potential for them to migrate, on their own has been lost.
Yeah.
So that's why we have to do,
especially when the Gulf Stream goes kind of.
Yeah. So they tend to shoot south.
Yeah.
So that's called assisted migration. So that is a concept that's been toyed around with in my field, where we actually take corals and we start to move them further north, where potentially the water's a little colder. It's more like climate's a little like the environment's a little bit better for them, and see how they do. So that is something that's been talked about. Is like, can we move? But that scientists, like one person comes up with an idea and there's a million others to be like, that's a terrible idea because this, and this, and then we all yell at each other for a long time.
Well, any kind of human intervention is always kind of scary because everybody knows that you try to solve one problem and you create 5 others.
Exactly.
That nature probably would have just solved given enough time.
Right.
But we don't really have time because everybody wants to see something happen in their small existence of a lifetime that we all have.
Yep.
I got 50 years. I want to see
some change.
I want to see results. And then it's like, well, now I got to do something quick and hasty. And
so here's an organism that has been around for hundreds of thousands of years, that evolves very slowly, and we're trying to basically ramp up its cycle, where we're spawning these things in labs under manipulated conditions to make them think it's the second full moon or the first full moon in August, So there's a lot of research going on to this because this problem's happening all over the world. Like, a lot of my dissertation research focused on here in Florida, but the other half of it was in Malaysia and the Indo-Pacific region, because they're facing similar issues, but they probably have 5% of the funds. Here in the U.S., even though you'd probably say you gave like $1 million to a project, it's really not that much in the big scheme of things for like what's being asked.
Yeah, $1 million goes quick once you pay a couple people.
Yeah, it's not really that much money in the big scheme of things for here. But that's in the U.S., it's not hard to get that kind of budget. Whereas if you're working in Malaysia or some of the other parts of the world, they just want it to be done for out of your pocket. It's a passion project. So that's why some of my research in Malaysia is really focusing on how do we work with basic tools, and really certain species to improve the process. And it's going to be something that's probably not going to be fixed in my timeline, but
you can put your dent in it.
I'll do, because the big focus right now is restoration, right? So it's like, oh well, let's just start restoring corals. And it's like, well, it's also kind of turned into an agricultural operation where you're growing corals in ocean-based nurseries, you're growing corals on land, and you're taking these things back out just to try and increase the volume of what's there. But the analogy's been given that coral restoration is really just like planting trees in a burning forest. Like, are you just wasting time and money doing this? Yeah. And that's why I think coral restoration can be actually pretty damaging towards like the issue of what's going on, because a lot of the mindset is, well, when we run into a problem in our society or something's like, can we just science our way out of this? Can we just figure out a way to get around it? So maybe we don't have to change maybe our lifestyles, but we can fix the problem. We don't we don't have to really address what's causing the problem. We can just fix it by figuring out a solution, or science, like I say, science our way through it.
Is there anywhere that it's not getting depleted, like that you can study, like, oh, it's still good here, or because pollution in the ocean is so widespread, it instantly goes everywhere? It's not like groundwater pollution on land, like once you pollute the ocean, it's kind of starts to dilute to everywhere. I would imagine the microplastics in the ocean aren't great for them.
Yeah, we're all just drinking plastic these days.
Oh yeah, 100%.
We're all just sucking down plastic and everything.
It's like a credit card a week or something crazy.
Yep. I love me some plastic in the morning.
You got to eat a little bit of microplastics every day.
We'll find out a reason that's good for our health at some point.
Somebody like you, a scientist, will get paid to say why it's fine to eat a little bit of plastic.
That's a scary thing too, is like, you know, there are a lot of science, like I've been approached in opportunities like that where it's like, hey, come work for us. Mm-hmm. We will pay you a really good salary.
Play ball.
Really good salary, but you need to play ball, and you realize you're working for an oil company.
Yeah.
And when you look at the agreements, it's like you can't say A, B, C, D. You know, it's just like it's pretty clear what's going on.
In a couple weeks, how the BP oil spill was actually good for the environment.
So it's
some crazy stuff like that where you have to like.
And I mean, you take someone like myself, or, you know, who's been in school for 12 years after high school, and you get into the sciences. And like I said, funding in the sciences is really tough. It's super competitive. Like we talked about writing grants. You can spend 3-4 months more writing a grant for, say, $100,000, right, to fund a 2-year project. And that's not a lot to ask for, you know, for a 2-year project, plus your salary and expenses. And then you'll spend 4 months working on this thing, and then you don't get it. And it's like the unknown of like pouring yourself into something for months and then not even having the return is really hard. And that happens a lot. Like this grant that I told you we were supposed to hear back a few days ago, which is basically my research for the next 3 years. They just haven't got back to anybody yet. But it's a project we've been writing up over the last year and a half to do. And I think we made it into it was like a 200 people pool. Then it made it to about 20 people, and they're only going to take maybe 12. So, you know, like we could find out
who's trying to, like, it's not the U.S. that you sent that offer to, right?
This is a group out of I want to say I always forget whether they're in Dubai or I think it's Dubai. They're out of Dubai.
Okay, so it's not like a U.S.-based money that's going to this, and you're trying to study overseas in Malaysia with this grant?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's all to people sitting in the U.S. all sounds very far away and very like very crazy.
Yeah. So this is a group out of Dubai, I believe is what it is. That's putting these funds together, and to fund, like I said, so many projects. So we could find out we can get it, and then you've invested all this time.
Yeah.
I mean, usually you just try and find a different grant, but it's really hard to stay sustainable, like be sustainable in this field because funding is hit or miss. And
are you worried that the person that you're sending this grant to may not fully understand? Like you're sending this proposal to somebody that may not fully grasp
100%.
at all, or
100%.
even be able to in some way interpret what you're trying to do?
Oh yeah. I've had grants where like I've sent them in and I've gotten denied on, and they come back and the person's like, we denied you because like this reason. It's like, what? Like this is 100% false. Like these things do exist. And this is written on page like 2, and it was like in bold, and they're like, you didn't add this, and it's there. And so you waited a year on something that somebody just probably breezed over, denied, and changed the course of your life for 2-3. You know, like it's just.
I imagine it like the TikTok thing when he was in front of Congress, and he's like, Congress is like, does it connect to my Wi-Fi? And the guy's like, yeah, it uses Wi-Fi. Like, what do you mean? And they're just asking like these, like they don't make sense because they don't understand what they're even looking at. And that's what I worry is like somebody doesn't understand what they're looking at that has money to hand out for research a freaking baseball field. Like, you know, like the same person is deciding like random things that they're way underqualified to do.
And I mean, in their defense, they do bring on panels of like experts. So it's not just Joe Schmo like sitting there like being like, no, yes. Like no, they get reviewed. I'm sure there are people, but like you also like with the sciences and like especially like with a PhD, you know, you're very specific in your knowledge. And it's like somebody would look at me, it's like, oh, Joe, you have a PhD in like ocean sciences, right? And like, yeah, it's like, oh, so you must be able to name like every fish in the world. I was like, I bet you there's high schoolers out there that can name more fish here in Florida than I can.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you
find a fisherman.
Yeah. You're like, I guarantee you, I don't know as much as that stuff. like, our knowledge gets really funneled into very specific points. Like, like my research focused on improving global restoration processes for like these corals. And so I can tell you a whole lot about that, but it's pretty specific. And when you get a bunch of people who are very specific and you start telling them like, oh, you don't know your field, it's like, that's when we start to butt heads on things.
So this is where a lot of people may end up disliking you. If the Florida state government came to you and they were like, hey, mini season down in the Keys, I think we're killing too many. Should we do away with it? Should we stop it for a couple of years? Because that's like a Florida hold true.
Hey, man, I've been down there during mini season. The thing with mini season, just like, I'm more afraid of getting hit by a boat.
They get a lot of people down there.
Yeah, just like people get crazy during mini season. I think I'm a big fisherman. I love being in the water. I love lobstering. And when it comes to the guidelines that are set forth by the state as far as fishing regulations, just follow it. Like the numbers have some science behind them, and they change, but they're changing year to year based on like what stocks are like and what's going on. And just follow the guidelines and enjoy fishing. Like go catch some lobster. Like some of us, we enjoy the reef just to see it, but the reefs have other benefits beyond just seeing them. We can fish them. We can enjoy them for these other reasons. And I said, I love going down during mini season. I love lobstering. I don't like the way mini season makes people act because, like I said, I've probably seen more fights break out down in the Keys during mini season.
Well, people get their whole quota in like 20 minutes too.
Oh, everybody knows their spots, and
yep.
Yeah, if you don't know your spots, then you're wasting your time down there. But yeah, and that's when it comes to like the guidelines here. All I say is just follow them. They're there for a reason, and they're there to help balance things out.
So I grew up in a fishing community, and there was it was always a battle between the fishermen and the legislators. They were always trying to stop how many you can get, and constantly was always the thing of like, you're ruining the community because you can only show up with one tuna a season. Yeah. Like that's gonna you can't run a fishing boat off of something like that. Mm-hmm. So those problems were always constant. My dad was a lobsterman growing up, like setting traps, and he would even tell me stories of they would get their quota in fish, and a lot of people would take their quota in fish and they would go offshore, and there would be a different country's vessel sitting there that would get your quota, buy it from you, and then you could get your quota and bring it into shore. So you double up.
That's happening all the time.
Yeah, like it's crazy. Like this world of like, he said it was a Chinese boat, but I could have been anything. Just off in international waters, you'd go hand them a whole amount of fish, and then you'd go get your quota. So you'd be doubling down, and they forced him to do that basically because you couldn't make enough off of just your quota. So instead of our community getting all those fish, half of them would be gone.
Yeah, and
kind of pushed you into a weird spot.
It's tough when not everybody plays by the rules, and it's hard to be. It's a tough topic.
The fishing world is crazy like that because people are always like stealing fish, basically, where you're not legally allowed to catch that fish that time of year.
Yeah, I've always tried to be really good about it. I know I've seen it out there happen, and
probably happens at restaurants more than people realize too. Like if you go downtown to a restaurant that serves fish, I bet you some of those were caught illegally.
Yeah, seasoned there's like in the Gulf side when is it here where like grouper got shut down early because like the commercial side collected too much, and so all the people that were just out there fishing like me couldn't catch, like they cut the season off short. It's like, what the heck?
Yeah.
Balance those quotas so that like the recreational fishermen can actually have a full season, and commercial can't just like fish it out way before us. Is
it weird that some fish are like kind of depleting so much that they start to make a twist on other fish? Like, like I feel like they're adding fish that we can eat more and more because the quotas on the good fish that everybody wants are starting to be up. So now fish that nobody really wanted to eat 10 years ago
is now coming back because it's like been stocked basically to a degree. Yeah, I mean, the whole fishery side of things, like, so in my lab at the University of Florida, we worked out of Apollo Beach, and they had the tropical aquaculture lab.
Yep.
I guess that's technically Ruskin. up
Where
there.
all the manatees hang out.
Yeah, so at the like the whole Manatee Viewing Center.
Yeah.
And right next to it, they
On a
expanded
power
it.
plant.
Yeah, there's a power. Well, that's Tico.
That's why it's so warm, the water.
Yeah, so they all hang out there. And then next to it, there's the Center for Conservation. That's like a collaboration with the Florida Aquarium and the University of Florida, Antico. That's where I did my 4 years. That was my office was out of there. And then we had in Ruskin, we had the Tropical Aquaculture Lab, or where they did a lot of the ornamental stuff, or like a lot of stuff for restocking too. So those are like all the fish experts for the state. So every time I walked in there, it was just all fish. And this conversation, and I was just like, whoa, like, hey man, talk corals, all good. Like you start talking fish, you're out of the game.
Because there's the two kind of fish too. There's the Reef style fish,
like the ornamentals. And this,
like something you'd put in like a fish tank, and then there's like the
game fish,
which are two completely different worlds in themselves.
Yeah, I guess Tao is more ornamental when I think about it. But yeah, it's a whole world, man, and there's a lot going on for sure.
And you've been diving all over the world to see some of the cool stuff that's under there, and you were talking about your 360 video stuff, which is really cool.
Yeah, so actually, I was going to show you some of the stuff because 360. I mean, it's coming. It's been around for a while. Like
I think VR just had a bloom,
big bloom, and that's kind of like we saw that coming. Is that I mean, like these headsets, 360 headsets, been around for a minute. But once Apple enters the game, I don't know if they wanted to enter the game with a $3,500 headset, which
I think it already flopped. I think they were estimating like 3.5 million pre-orders, and it did like 0.9.
Yeah, I think their stocks dropped that day. I was like, oh dang.
I was watching it, like I had both up. I had the stock up, and I was watching like the unveil, and you could see it kind of like ticking with the unveil.
Yep. Well, it was like I was so excited because one of the grants I'm on right now is with the Dutch, and we're working on building some devices to go up in the North Sea to put on reefs to basically collect data without us even there. So we'll drop this probably device that's half the size of this table on the reef, and it will collect data, anything from like temperature and eDNA, which we talked about, where it's like you can take a small sample of water and it can figure out almost like everything that's in the area, just like fish, because like fish sheds scales and other things. So you can actually kind of figure out just from a small sample of water what's been in the area or what's there. Yeah. And then my part of that project was to develop a 360 camera that can live stream on the device and basically be used for education and observation. And there's a lot of complex things that come with that to make it work, but that's the grant that we have going through right now to do this research in the North Sea. And kind of what made me excited about that is, VR was really just, or like 360 VR stuff was really just kind of on the edge of taking off. And we knew that probably once Apple entered the game, that it was going to really help boost that kind of market. And so Triton, which is my company, we wanted to start doing 360 early. So we jumped on doing underwater 360. One of my good buddies actually makes these domes that you can create some pretty quality footage underwater with. Yeah. And so him and I started working together. And so he hooked me up with some stuff. And so we just started filming all over the place. Like we said, we just got back from Africa, did some filming down there for a group, and then Malaysia earlier. So that being said, we knew the tech was really kind of on the edge. So when Apple released theirs, I sat there and watched that keynote oh, come on, here it comes. And this is going to be the thing that pushes us over. And then they get to their big demo, and I was like, oh, I wasn't really looking for an augmented reality because I wasn't. The AR stuff it has its place.
I think it's very gimmicky a little bit.
Yeah. I'm just going to use a computer. Yeah. I don't need a screen in my screen that hovers. I'm just going to use a computer.
I have 2 monitors already, and they work great.
Yeah.
They were cheap.
I saw that. I'm like, and then all the things that they were talking about were going to be really cutting edge stuff. Really is kind of already out there in Oculus, some of those platforms. That's really nothing crazy new.
I just think nobody that's done it before has the hardware knowledge that Apple does. Yeah. Where people are like, Google did it and Facebook. And I'm like, yeah, but what other hardware does either of those have that is impressive? Google has nothing else besides an attempt of a phone and an attempt of Google Glass.
And no, that's it. But Apple brings this level of their chips, their technology is good. And it can So, and we talk about some of the resolutions of those screens and what they need to be at. Because, when you're putting a screen 2 inches from your eyes, you're going to see these pixels. You're like, you can have a 4K screen, but if you're
Basically
staring at
shining a light into your eyeball.
Yeah, you're going to notice it's not as clear as best thing out there. But so yeah, I was like watching, like, okay, this can be good. This can be good. And then you get to the end, it's like $3,500. I'm like, and now it's not accessible to people.
Yep.
And that's where I'm like, you lost them. Like Meta now, like when Oculus first came out, they were so smart. They dropped those headsets. I think they lost money on them because they were selling like Oculus 2 for, I want to say it was like $250 when they first came out. Like it was cheap. And you could, it's like, that was consumer level. Like you could buy this and have a nice VR headset. And a lot of people could get into this.
I think it's very methodical of they set this price, and now I think the phones are going to creep up more. I think the phones are going to start to close that gap.
Like because they wanted something to kind of push other things higher?
Yeah, because now when you look at a $2,000 phone in a year and a half, you're going to be like, well, it's not a $3,500 headset.
Yep.
But it's the ability to close that gap.
Yep.
And without something really expensive, you can't have something that gets to it.
Yeah, because like once it goes up too, it never comes back.
No. And the phones, realistically, I mean, the amount of use that they get, a $2,000 phone isn't going to make you not buy the phone. It's like you're going to have to.
Yeah, you're just slowly getting more and more used to those prices where yeah, it's
just to make us ready for it. It's a
very gradual conditioning to make us accept higher prices.
Because I remember when the first iPhone came out, it was like $600 was crazy. Like absolutely insane.
Yeah, it's like nobody will buy that.
Yeah. And now everybody has one.
Yep. Yeah, I got one. You got me.
Yeah, I mean that's how it goes. It's not like you're not going to buy it.
Well,
yeah.
I did bring my Oculus. If you want to see what some of our underwater 360 looks like.
I will do that towards the end.
At some point, yeah.
We'll do that towards the end because I do want to watch some of that, but I don't want to get queasy.
Oh no, yeah, so had Cooper over and he raced on my simulator and I tried to warn him like, hey, first timers, like this doesn't go well.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how it went. How was that for you, Cooper?
It was good. Bronte was like, you don't look so good. I'm like, I'm fine. Stop asking me. I'm fine. She was just like, you look pale. I'm like, yeah, I just need some sunlight.
I just need to not have been doing that for the last.
Exactly. I was like, I think I stopped at the right time. Yeah. I think if I waited any longer, it would have been a little worse.
But you got better.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, you just have to do that probably like 4 more times, and then you won't get sick again.
It's just reps.
Yeah, it's you try to explain that to people. It's like, oh no, you just got to be sick probably 3 more hours, and then you won't get sick again. It's like people on boats.
Just reps. It takes time.
These ones, it's like the video with Triton that we're doing with this 360. So we have a lot of underwater 360 content.
Yeah,
and that's something we've had to be really aware of. Is that VR technology is not user friendly to everybody. Some people put those things on. They have a terrible experience the first time and they never want to touch it again because they get sick. And so especially when you're working underwater where you get a lot of water movement, last thing you want to be doing is sitting still and then your headset's doing one of these in the camera and you think that's going to make you really sick.
Yep.
So we've had to basically start inventing underwater tripods to really stabilize footage. So the footage I have here was for a project I did in Kenya. So we went out there with a nonprofit that wanted us to film their restoration projects, their reef sites, and then take that footage to the villages and like the communities there in southern Kenya and show people what the reefs look like. Because some of the people there have never been underwater, never seen a reef, lived on the beach their whole life, but like they just don't go in the water. And so we wanted to show them that. So we brought stuff out there to anchor cameras to the ground, get things as stationary as possible. And what came out of it was just as beautiful shots, like you're just standing there. Mm-hmm. And because that's the experience and that's the way the footage looks, you're not getting sick. You can actually enjoy it. And we put down some rough cuts, took them to some of the people to see. And it was like one of the best moments of my life is seeing some of these people just like start to tear up and just so emotional. It's like see fish.
Like people that live 50 feet from the water their whole life.
I've never seen these fish before alive.
Wild.
I've never. So and grown men, like we were really just like trying to be like really tough. And I remember like I'd give them the headset and they'd sit there cross-armed, and I was like, hey, you actually need like use the controller to like point at things, and they'd be like begrudgingly like, oh, okay, fine, like the village chief, or something.
Yeah.
And he was just like, first of all, VR tech is something none of them have seen. So this is already kind of like a
You already blew their mind once.
Yeah, it's already a whoa moment. They're like, okay.
Put this headset on.
And then you flip on the footage and all of a sudden they're surrounded by a school of like fish and they're just like, what? And like they're freaking out.
Yeah.
Like someone's like, I shouldn't be able to breathe right now. It's just like, because your brain, you see these things and your brain doesn't necessarily know the difference between being underwater and what you're seeing. Like, you're just seeing a big video, but when it immerses all your senses, sometimes the brain will have like this panic and we're like, what's happening? It's just too overwhelming. So then you get these big tough guys that would just slowly crack a smile and then be like, oh, that's pretty cool, I guess.
Yeah, they actually start to like come around and like it. And that's funny because
like, all right, that's a win.
You get to really convince somebody. But even showing them the VR, even people in the US, there's still a lot of people that wouldn't really understand or even have seen VR. I remember the first time I saw it was like way long ago, and it was a phone that just had split screen.
Yeah, like the
and
Google
you, like,
Cardboard.
Put it into the thing. Yeah. That was like the first introduction to it. And that like kind of didn't really take off as much as you would think it would have also.
Yeah.
Because it was so cheap.
It was.
It was already on your phone, and YouTube videos still support that. Like you can watch any YouTube video like that. I don't know. That was a weird thing. So you go underwater with this mechanism that can do 360 video.
Yeah.
And is this like the 360 where if you turn, or is this like a 360 video of like somebody just swimming?
I like to set the cameras. And so, they film in full spherical space. Mm-hmm. So I set the cameras because, like I said, whenever you're moving a camera, usually it caught, and like say you're sitting stationary, you're going to be like, oh, it's not going to feel good because your body doesn't feel like it's like your brain you get queasy. So I like to set them, and then so it's filming in all directions, and then that way when you get into the experience, like I'll show you later, you can stand up, you can look around. It's as if you're there. And you're trying to take out any other signs of like camera equipment in it. So when you look down, all you see is like the reef. You look out, there's nothing to impede your view. You're just in the moment. And that's kind of a cool way, I think, I like with VR, just help to connect with people, to help them see what it's like out there. Some people are not able to scuba dive. Some people can't go underwater. And it's not a cheap hobby to have either. No. So it's not something that everybody gets to do. So any tech, I get excited about tech that can really help to communicate. And that's kind of like why Triton was started, with this whole goal of bridging the gap between science and just like the general public. Because, Cooper, have you ever had to read a scientific paper in high school or something for a research project? Or
been a while. I read them pretty frequently still. I like doing research, so I'll actually read like a scientific paper. But
what's your experience when you read one of those kind of papers? Like maybe when you first started?
Well, I'm like, with any kind of reading, I'm of the idea that if it can't be translated, if a like, what is it, like a high school reading level can't understand it all, you're writing incorrectly. But obviously a scientific paper is a little different, where you use words that don't make sense to everyone and are a little complicated. So that usually turns me off of reading anything.
Yeah.
And that's my thought of any book I read. If it's not like as easy to understand as possible, that's on the writers.
Yeah.
Like that's a issue with the writer. But then a scientific paper, you're not writing it for a reader. You're writing it for kind of like the information to be in the world.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. And that's
that'd be a different concept than writing a book.
Yeah, no, it's your audience, like you're picking who your audience is, and scientific papers are usually they're targeted for other audience. So the jargon, the words you're using is typically expected that people reading it will understand it, but they're usually people in your field. But I remember reading papers in high school and, didn't fully speak the language, and it was just always such a burden. Like you start picking up these papers like, this is the worst thing I've ever had to read in my life, and you just push it aside. And I think that's something we've struggled with in the scientific community, is just not connecting right with like what we're working on with the general public, or just a broader audience and what it is. So you get these scientists that speak very specific languages and their topics, and you try and put them in a position where they have to explain this to maybe a high school class or junior high, and it doesn't go well. Like they just don't communicate on the same level. So the idea of Triton, which is like where these VR projects is coming from, which is the company I have now, where we do these projects in Malaysia and here in the Keys, is to really, on top of the science, have an equal focus on communication. And I have a background in underwater film and videography and stuff too, so kind of taking those two fields and filming, being intentional about filming what I'm doing, and then, creating material, utilizing all these platforms that we have now that are really good at reaching people, YouTube and TikTok, Instagram. These are new tools that we can use to kind of share these stories.
Yep.
And so Triton with a focus on communicating and telling stories about what's going on in the ocean and helping more people to understand and learn at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, there's more places now to put out content than ever.
It's crazy.
And even with this streaming platforms now, we were talking about it a little bit where they're all like fighting for any kind of content. I was just watching one the other day of an underwater. It was a guy that basically formed a bond with a octopus.
Yes, the octopus man. It was octopus
Yes.
man? Yeah.
And I was like, that really hooked me because I was like, man, it's like a pet. It was like his dog. Like he even like helped it in a couple situations where like a shark tried to get it.
And like, think about if you like step back and look at that story, like there wasn't a ton to it, but there is a really, people connect with these stories where people connect with nature. And it was like, you watch it, it's like, yeah, not a ton happened, but like, an amazing story was told out of these simple, I don't want to say simple, but this
what I kept
unique
imagining
experience
was like the amount of time that this man spent in the ocean.
Yeah, just cold water all the time.
It was not warm too.
No
Like
way.
it was like a cold area.
Yeah,
it was like off
sorry.
the coast of Africa or something, and it was crazy though. That's a great documentary. I think it was on like Hulu or Amazon or something.
My octopus teacher, right?
Yeah.
Yep. So see, you'd be like, yeah, you can make a story.
Well, the octopus are just so interesting to begin with. I mean, there's already people that say they're aliens.
Oh, have you heard? Do you know just how smart those things are?
I've seen them open jars. We had one in my high school. In middle school, we had one in like one of the labs, and this thing was crazy smart.
Yeah.
It would open any jar you put in there.
They have memory. That was one of the biggest things that blew me away. I used to work in aquariums, before. I was like, when you're trying to get in the marine sciences, you just intern in every place you can that has a fish tank. And even one of my professors in college, she used to have an octopus, and she told us this story that she'd come home from work, and her octopus would have left its aquarium and would be sitting on top of the refrigerator. And she's like, because the octopus was waiting for her to get the food out of the freezer to give to it. So it would literally come out of its cage, like aquarium, wait on top of the fridge, and then come back. And then, but probably the best stories, this is probably one of the most famous stories that surround octopus and just the aquarium industry, which gets passed around, is, I want to say I believe it was the Monterey Bay Aquarium that this is what happened at, where they had a big octopus there. And in one of their exhibits, they had a crab exhibit, and they were coming in each morning and more crabs were missing. And they couldn't figure out like why the crabs kept disappearing from this system. And then eventually, there's like one or two left, and there was like, there's probably 20 or something in there at one point. And then the janitor was walking around at night cleaning and caught an octopus running across the floor of the exhibit. And so basically the octopus jumped out of its own system, ran across the aquarium into an adjacent, not just like the same room, like a different room in the aquarium, jumped in the crab tank, grabbed one, eat it, come back.
Yeah.
Or like vice versa, bring it back. So it was leaving its system every night just to steal a crab and come back. Like they're that smart.
Like across like where people
walk.
walk.
It was, and that's why you see they actually have to put turf grass around octopus enclosures now. So if you ever look at the top, if you go in an aquarium and you see an octopus tank, you'll see it has turf grass because their tentacles can't stick to that.
Oh.
So they'll get to that. They don't like the feeling of it.
They can't climb
out.
out.
They won't climb out. So that's the way that they keep octopus enclosures open.
Yeah.
But they can't get out. So yeah, they say they're more intelligent than a house cat. But the only sad thing is they typically only live about 2 years. It's like
really
super short lifespan, but very intelligent.
I figured they'd live longer than that because some aquatic animals live pretty damn long. Like dolphins, we see all the time in Florida. I mean, I was at the beach the other day and saw a school of dolphins swimming, and even manatees live a long time. You'd think octopus would live for a while.
That's always one thing that kind of like, oh man, what a bummer deal. Because, they're very intelligent. Probably one of the more intelligent things that live in the ocean. But 2 years life expectancy for most of the species. I think that's kind of generous.
They're pretty crazy. I mean, I've seen videos of them taking down basically any animal in the ocean they can take down. It's kind of a cool deal. Octopus always have been interesting to me because they don't seem similar to anything. Like you see a shark and you're like, okay, it's just like a mean fish. But like then octopus are just like this completely foreign entity altogether.
Oh, they're always so fun to see.
That's why like the whole thing of like people are like, oh, they're alien like.
Yeah, no, they're intelligent. You can just tell.
Yeah.
So they're always fun to see when you're diving or around. Well, Coop.
Yeah.
I wonder if I need to give you something.
Yes, let's see this art.
I don't know where our time is at.
No, you're good.
We've probably been talking fish and corals for a long time.
Yeah, I think people have heard enough.
We've exhausted them on it, so thank you for bearing with my coral talk. I did bring this actually too. I was going to pop it up at some point.
Yeah, is that a sausage link?
This is that same coral. This is staghorn coral from Florida, but probably about, I think they said this is about 8 to 10 million years old. So this is fossilized, found out here. So you can see that branch that's been cut off. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine if you just like broke a branch, that's like what you're seeing in the center.
So that's how big it grows in.
So that just kind of gives you an idea how long those have been here, and so how hard it is to see us lose them all in just like 30 years. You know?
Well, because when you think about a tree, the tree grows wider and wider as it grows, but this will probably just grow arms longer and longer.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
They thicken up a little bit, but then they just grow up. It's like that's millions of years old, and that's still the same coral species that you see sitting right there that we have off the coast today. So it was just something to give you a little bit of idea of context.
Let's make a great countertop.
Yeah. Couldn't hold down a ton of paper with that, but it works. So, okay.
All right.
Cooper, should I show the art? Should we get the art?
Let's break the art out.
Cooper hasn't seen this yet either. Should you give a little background story?
Yeah, so
what this is, or how we got to this point?
Yeah, how did we even get to this point?
Because we met kind of on weird terms. Like,
yeah, you came over to look at my 240 that I had for sale.
Well, I met Garrett at the gym.
Yep.
And him and I ended up like talking and working out together for a little bit. Like tall guys, you know, we connect to each other right away.
Bang your head on things together.
Same problems in life. And I told him I was looking for a car, and he's like, cool story. Everybody's looking for a car these days. And specifically, I was looking for an S chassis because I sold mine in California for way less than I should have back in the day.
Yep.
And get a text from Garrett like probably 4 hours after that, and it's, my buddy's selling a 240. Check it out. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Tend to find out we live pretty close to each other.
Same neighborhood.
Walk down the road to Cooper's house.
Yep.
Check out the car. Cooper had to probably talk me out of this buy.
I definitely talked you out of it.
He definitely
100%.
did. God bless him, because man, I wanted one bad. You know how it is. You start to look through things like, oh yeah, like sure the doors are all missing, but I could fix that.
I'm a bad salesman.
So Cooper pushed me out of it, which thankfully he did, and then we ended up staying in touch, obviously. And
now this week we're going to look at another car you. Another drift car, a Z chassis.
Yep.
A little different.
A little further north.
But you also showed up with a, what was it? What cars?
I have a 86 Corolla.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so 86 Corolla with what engine is it? It's not the Beams
black
engine,
top
right?
20 valve.
Okay.
So, yeah. That was my first, I bought that car, $2,000 when I was 15 years old.
Okay.
Reno, Nevada. And I fully rebuilt that 86. So, I mean, you know, A86s, it's an 85 GTS.
Yeah.
Like those things have just gone up like S chassis too.
Super cool car. I mean, it's probably more sought after than an S chassis.
Yeah.
At this moment, everybody wants those things. They're so like, when you think of like Initial D, they're like that iconic, and yours is on like the small wheels and stuff. Super cool setup, that car.
Yeah, that one. I don't. That's when I was like, you know, when you're buying these cars back in the day, you're like, oh, let's build them for the track, and I drifted it a lot in like back when I was in Southern California, and then I got to the point where I'm thinking like, oh dang, I don't think I can afford to put this thing into a wall one day. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, you're right. They've become pretty sought after. And,
that was probably a good investment. $2,000.
Yeah, and much more than that. But I mean, this thing's fully rebuilt. I mean, full like suspension.
I just mean like
motor.
Even no matter what, like that thing is just like a good hold of value car.
It's a fun car, especially
a clean enough for what it is. I don't know how the underside looks, but
no, it's pretty good. I mean, it's still. I mean, I did the Panda paint job, which is that white and black, which is really iconic to the Terrenos that came out of Japan. Because this is not one from Japan. This is a US one, GTS.
Which makes it even more uncommon.
Yeah. Because a lot of these are coming over from Japan now. Like people are just buying them out of auctions and getting them back here in the States.
I prefer to drive on the correct side of the road when I'm in my car.
I'm a sucker for that too.
Yeah. A lot of people like don't really care for that, but I actually prefer it. Like I don't want a car that I'm on the wrong side of.
Yeah. I'm with you too. It would be fun to have maybe like an S15 or something one of these days, but I really enjoy being on that side, on the right side.
That's why like GTRs don't appeal to me very much because you're on the wrong side. But and then we started talking about art. You helped me put up the ceiling in this room and helped me do a lot of the design of this.
We started to conceptualize this facility.
And then we started talking about art and building things, and you were like, oh, I can draw and paint a logo for this room because it needs like its own logo. Yeah. I'll move things around as needed, move the TV down or something, but let's see what we're working with here.
So you got to give so with this design, Cooper, this was originally your idea. So I just asked my Cooper, what do you want? He's like, and he laid out this idea.
Yeah.
I hope you still have it on a piece of paper somewhere.
Somewhere, yeah.
And we've tussled with some ideas, but this is the final painting of your new Crest style Bogetti Studios.
That's
Bogetti.
Tight.
So yeah, this is all watercolored painting. We'll take this.
Dude, that's super sick. I don't know how much they can see it. I was gonna try to like prop it up over here so that it's visible maybe.
Oh, it actually works. We get a little glare, but
yeah.
So yeah, I mean,
Dude,
this we get this cleaned up.
I should talk into a mic. I'll put it back there in a second.
Did you hear?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Wow, that came out awesome. So the plan was to get a big one made for right up there. Yep. Definitely put this up for now. Man, that looks so cool.
So we wanted to do something that kind of had a family crest style, told a little bit of a story.
Yep.
Of course, a lot of the car elements.
If you're listening to this, it'll be posted on my Facebook page, CooperBogetti.com, or Cooper Bogetti on Facebook, and then we'll hopefully get some merch made of it too. But
yeah, so I'll take this, and this is just the painting. So most of my style, like I told you, I paint things, sketch them out first. We'll take this, we'll vectorize it, illustrate it, and then you can just go nuts with, making shirts or whatever you want with it, and that will be a really clean, illustrated version of it. But this is just the original painting that you can do what you want with.
Dude, that looks so cool. That is such a sick.
I liked your idea for the flag reflecting in the visor.
Yep.
That was a cool ad. It needed some more color, so I was like, okay, this is.
Yeah.
For everybody that's just listening, there'll be photos.
Something like this will fill up that negative space right above the TV so well. And we were even talking about get it made initially out of metal, cut out, and then print or vinyl on it, kind of like metal layers almost. I'm sure somebody will reach out to me that does something really cool.
Yep.
That's the awesome thing about this
Someone reach out.
network of people is I'll get messages of people that can actually do cool things, and I just have ideas.
You can just say hey, can somebody help me with this? And
yes.
Sure, and if someone shoots you a message real quick.
Dude, that's sick.
Yeah, I like the way this came out.
Yeah, this
is
a cool awesome.
One. But there were two designs that we looked at.
We did talk about two different designs.
I was I was pretty much in this position where I need to get these things done before I leave for Indonesia, because otherwise they're going to wait too long.
They're going to sit.
Number 2, which we can leave ghosted. I'll let you do a reveal.
Dang. We got the Camaro now. Doing a nice little smoky burnout. That's super sick too, with the red and blue CB. I'm sure they can see that one too. If you guys are watching, I'll hold it up for a second so you can look. But again, it'll be posted on Facebook so you guys can go see, and Instagram, Cooper Bogetti. You should go follow anyways there. Dude, those came out so crazy. I can't believe you hand draw this stuff and then paint it in. I don't know. Is that one paint or is that?
That's all paint, yeah.
That's crazy. It almost looks like it's colored pencil too.
Yeah.
The way that one has the
different cut, kind of the shading into it.
Yeah, the depth to it. Wow, that's so cool, man.
Well,
that's
this one too,
crazy.
we'll be able to vectorize and clean up.
So what first happened was you showed me some of your military style art, and it was cresty, and it was very sailor because you kind of goes with your background. And I was like, man, that would be really cool in the automotive world, because I don't think anybody's really doing that.
Not that I can think of.
Not like this. Definitely nothing like that.
Like Cooper's saying, so a lot of my artwork comes from. I was in the Navy. Of course, Navy Marine Corps. We'll probably explain that a little bit later.
Yeah.
But most of my art style more focuses on this American traditional style, which is probably an old school tattoo traditional style.
Yep.
Which is bold black lines, bold color, lots of black is kind of some key things of traditional. I left out that brown background for the sake of making this easier to work with and print with.
It's a little more modern.
Felt like it kind of fit with your backdrop a little bit better too. So yeah, so some of the artwork now is kind of more modernized American traditional art style. So my page that I do most of my artwork is called the Hold Fast Collective, and that's all military kind of art design. So if you're going to look at pretty much any artwork on there is military related. But of course,
not anymore.
I have this passion for cars, so I've wanted to start taking start dabbling in the art car community. Yeah. So I've done a few designs there, and I just started a page called Auto Refresh Designs on Instagram, and that's where I'm going to start posting a lot of my car art. But this is kind of some of it too. So working with Cooper and with some of his designs it's been fun.
Yeah, so I'm going to put this stuff down in the link in the description so you guys can check it out, because there's some really cool stuff. If you're into that style of art, you'll definitely like these. And you've done actual work for the military.
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot.
It's such a weird thought, because like the military doing like obviously everybody needs graphic design, but it's like a weird thing to think about, like the military contracting a graphic designer.
It is. I mean, most of the time it's like command leadership paying out of pocket to have like a battalion or company logo done, or like certificates. So like certificates was a big thing back in the like old school Navy. Like we had these shellback certificates, which were these huge certs you got for passing the equator on a boat. And so kind of like it started with designing a certificate for command, and then it became just designing tons of artwork for all different types of branches and units and stuff, and all within that kind of traditional style. So I don't know, maybe some of the folks out there have seen the Hold Fast Collective, but that's what was born out of the military times.
Yeah, they should definitely check it out now, because it's got a lot of cool military style stuff. I've had a lot of people on here I've had quite a few people on here that have spent time in the military, and weirdly enough, they're all on boats and ships, which is very interesting.
Like I say, I was the Navy, but I never touched a boat.
No, stayed away from the boats.
Well, it was like, I joined when I went in. This was like right when the Afghanistan war was like pretty heavy.
Yeah.
And
so you joined during combat?
Yeah. So like right in like with the intention, like I said, I was in college, finishing up my undergrad degree. And I had some things happen to me where a good friend of mine lost his brother over in Afghanistan. And it was kind of like one of those moments where like this war that felt so distant from, like when you're in college, you're just like, oh, I'm living it up. I'm in college. Like, this is my little my bubble. And then something that is happening on the other side of the world, like that really impacts you. It just became very real. Mm-hmm. So when my buddy's friend passed away, it's just kind of hit us all that like there is some very significant things happening in the other like around the world that is now impacting us. Mm-hmm. And like what are we doing to like be a part of it, or like should we be doing something, or like should we just like put ourselves aside? And for me, is like I need to do something. I want to take part in what all this is going and do my part, I guess you could say. And so before my senior year of college, I went and joined to be a Navy corpsman. So I like the idea of being a corpsman, because corpsmen were basically field medics for the Marine Corps. So the Marines don't have their own medical personnel. They use Navy corpsmen that they train in like Marine Corps infantry tactics.
Okay.
And then they basically get linked up to a Marine Corps battalion, assigned to a company, and then a platoon. And then you become the sole medical provider within the platoon. And so that's kind of like, it's a really unique, like autonomous role you play as like a medical provider for all these guys in an infantry platoon. And so I was like, that's exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a medic with the Marines. And so I went into the Marine Corps recruiter's office, and he saw I was in college. He's like, oh, you should become an officer. I'm like, no, I want to be a corpsman. Like, I'm not doing this because I want to make a career out of this. I just want to do my part and do this specific job.
Yep, go through it and get out of it.
Yeah, and recruiters, they hold on to anybody that comes in their doors. But the guy looked at me, this Marine, and he's like, damn it, Doc. Like, he's like Joe at the time. He's like, if you would have said any other job, I would have talked you out of it. But he's like, that's the one job that like Marines actually appreciate. So he's like, but unfortunately, you have to go to the Navy, which is like that building right there. So he's like, go to that building right there, and if that recruiter tries to convince you of anything but a corpsman, you better come right back here. So he's like, no, go do that job. So I went over there. Obviously, I enlisted, became a corpsman, did boot camp and everything right after I finished college. So I went enlisted after college and did this job, and then So with corpsman, you go through like your training up in Chicago at the time, and then you go through like a Marine Corps style train. Like so, then you go like the Marine Corps side of the house, and they train you to become a field medical service technician. So 8404 corpsman, basically FMF, Fleet Marine Force, and that's when you basically have the skills of a field medic with some additional training plus infantry tactics and like battlefield type skills. And so you become like this hybrid, and then you get embedded with a Marine Corps unit. So that's, like I said, so pretty much any male at the time that was becoming a corpsman was instantly being sent to the Marine Corps side of the house to deploy. So once you got that 8404 NEC designator to your name, you were just in a lineup to go to Afghanistan.
Is it because there was pretty much just Marines being deployed?
Yeah, the Marines, I mean, no, like the Army was going.
Yeah.
The Marines were going, but the Marines had a pretty steady deployment, depending on who you were with. So like I was with the 1st Marine Division out of San Diego, or like Oceanside, Southern California.
Yeah.
And pretty steadily deploying to Afghanistan. So once you get out there, you just kind of get put into the next deploying unit. And so yeah, I ended up going to Afghanistan twice. The first time it was actually an augment with the Army. So I show up on a Marine Corps base, but the Army also, they liked corpsmen because we tended to have like, we were pretty well trained. Not to say I've been with a lot of Army medics who are impressive, but they were taking Navy corpsmen too. So the first time I deployed, I got attached to an Army unit and then went over to Afghanistan with a shock trauma platoon / artillery group. And then came back 6 months later, redeployed with Marine Corps and combat engineers. And then we supported like infantry platoons doing route clearance and that kind of stuff.
I feel like having the medical training is like the coolest side to also have in the US because I feel like medical is something that might always pop up anytime down the line. Like medical emergencies happen pretty frequently. And that seems like one of the best skills to walk away with because if you're a drone operator, you don't leave with like true real world usage almost. Like that is very specific
Some skills transfer better than others.
And I feel like medical is like one of those things. Like I always say I want to go and take medical classes, like first responder classes, because I go racing all the time. I'm around dangerous stuff. It'd be nice to have a little bit more experience.
Well, Cooper, I think I need to teach you something then.
Yeah, I mean,
I brought some stuff. One of them I think you should have.
I need to learn to do a tourniquet and stuff, you know, all the simple stuff.
I'm just going to bring you all these type of goods. You already got 2 paintings.
I mean, look at this.
So
goodness.
It's really just turned into like a show and tell type experience.
Yeah.
So this is one of my bags I carried with me.
Let me take a
my deployments.
break real quick.
And cut.
Back in. I was thinking though, did you guys also get better camouflage than the Army? Wasn't there a difference in the Army camo for the desert and the Marine camo?
Yeah, we always...
And the Armies didn't work as well, but the Marines had the proprietary...
So you did hear about this.
Yeah, I've heard about it before, and they wouldn't share...
Oh, it was such a hot thing where we... the Army at the time they went from ACUs to multicam, and multicam is what they're in right now. The Marine Corps has been in our deserts and woodlands, like it's like that digital, which has just worked really well. Like it's a really solid.
It's like a very small digital, very small pixel, basically.
Yeah, which is supposed to like the eye can't really pick up lines, which is why it's such a good camo. And we can pretty much use both patterns in Afghanistan, and it worked. It worked well. So the Marines. One thing you learn about Marines is they're probably the most like. Marine's a Marine. Like once you're a Marine, you're always a Marine for life. They're very proud, rightfully so, of like their history, and you don't touch Marine Corps stuff. It's like the Marines are one of the only branches where you'll never see them wear their uniforms in public. The Army can go out in town in public. I think the Navy can go out in town in public in their in like their camis. Like you'll see them at the grocery store or at the airport. The Marines are never allowed to do that unless it's like their dress uniform, because like they believe like this is the uniform we fight and die in. This is not something you wear to the grocery store. So they hold these things to be pretty sacred, which I really appreciate about the Marine Corps because they give proper respect and honor to like what they should.
Yeah.
So like when it came up, like you're talking about the Army's like, hey, we really like your digis. Like we want to we want to wear woodlands and deserts too. Marine Corps like, no, not gonna happen. And it's like, oh, well, we're only one team, one fight, right? And they were like, no, that's ours.
But the weird thing was like they said that the armies didn't actually work. Like it didn't like you could see it because they tried the digital, but it was too big, too small of too big of pixels. So it almost made it obvious instead of made it camo. And apparently it was like a big blunder issue, and they spent like millions of dollars developing it, and it didn't work.
I
And they
think
couldn't
that's
use the
probably true.
Marines even at all. Like even like, oh, we'll just reprint it.
Well, like when the multicam came out, like everybody thought that was just like the sickest stuff, you know?
Yeah.
And so like the Brits adopted it, and I think, I don't think the Aussies did. The Aussies always had their jelly bean uniforms, I think is what we called them, because they had like kind of like jelly bean looking prints all over them. But I know there were a couple other nations that took on the multicam, and yeah, I had like when I was at the Army, I was issued all multicam, and you still feel super cool when you get all these uniforms, but yeah, I don't really know how that stuck. I just know that they did try and switch, and then it just wasn't well received.
It's something pretty interesting that there was like a big issue there where the Army spent all this money and they had something that wasn't working right. It actually was opposite of what it was supposed to do, was making it easy to tell somebody was there instead of camo.
Yeah, because the Navy did that too. I mean, the Navy switched over to, we called them blueberries. So it was like that. At the time they just had, what were those called? The dungarees. It was like that blue shirt, dark blue pants, and then we switched to the NSUs or the whatever it was. It was the blue. We call them the blueberries, like the blue digital camouflage.
Yeah.
And everybody thought it was super cool at first, and they're like, "This doesn't make any sense." And then the Navy's like, "Oh, we need a new one." It's like those were around for maybe 3 years. They spent all this money on it, and then they switched into like their new green digital camis, which
That's funny.
so it's like just another testament to a lot of government spending on things that just change real quick.
Could be worse. You could be walking around in light baby blue.
Yeah, true. Well,
Nobody
you were
wants to do
talking
that.
about wanting to learn some medical stuff. And so I thought that actually might be a cool thing to actually show or talk about, is probably some like really basic things you could learn to maybe actually save a life. Who knows what you could learn. So this was my bag, which I carried with me on both deployments. Okay. And I'm not going to walk you through it because it would take too long. But there is
I'm sure there's quite a few
tourniquet.
things.
Have you ever used a tourniquet before?
No, I don't believe I've ever used one like this. Oh, where it twists to get tight?
These are cat tourniquets. These are the ones that were issued to us. There's a few different forms. Like, here's a tack tourniquet.
Sure, this cost the military $800, $900.
Yeah, like a stupid amount of money. And then
maybe $2,000.
so I'm gonna give you this one, but I'm also gonna show you how to use it, because like you're right. There's a lot of places where you could find yourself I've had friends that have encountered pretty bad injuries where they've had to tourniquet something. So I almost, whenever I go through things, I always have some stuff with me just in case. So just kind of give you an idea how these things work. And then I'm actually going to show you guys how to do a tourniquet with just a piece of cloth. Because this is probably one of the most basic skills that they hammer into a corpsman or any medic's brain, is how to tourniquet somebody quickly and correctly. Because civilian medicine is a little different from military medicine. Like, our priorities are different. We tend to experience more like major bleeding injuries. That's why in the civilian side, they go by like ABCs: airway, breathing, circulation. You kind of work with, make sure they breathe first, and then you assess bleeding. Whereas in the military, it's more typically major blast injuries or gunshot wounds on the battlefield. So we start with major bleeding first as our priority. So
is this one-time use breaks?
These things you don't want. You can use them. They're one-time use.
Because it looks like the plastic breaks to.
No, I'll show you. It's like,
okay.
If you're legitimately using one of these and someone's bleeding, you're not going to go put it in the washing machine when it's done and reuse it.
That's fair.
And they do kind of get worn out in the sun. But all you're going to do, I'll show you, just leave it looped, put it on, cinch it across, make sure you Velcro. And then also you're going to want to Velcro through here because it's like a security thing. It's like tighten it down.
Okay.
You just twist.
And then
you twist until we say you twist until the bleeding stops, which can be quite a bit. And then when you're tight enough, you lock it in, zip it down, write the time, and that's how you apply one of these tourniquets. And there really is only 4 places on the body you can use a tourniquet.
Yep.
So we say high and tight. So there's, if you talk about the human anatomy, you have like single bones and double bones. So the only place you can put a tourniquet over correctly is like over a single bone. Because you got your veins, those things that are bleeding run between the bones, and you're not going to get that proper pressure on those lower extremities. Whereas on the upper side, like your femur or your upper arm, where it's a single bone, you can actually clamp down on blood vessels to stop the bleeding. So here, just to give you a feeling what this is like.
It makes sense because I would think like, oh, somebody's bleeding like on their hand.
Yeah. So that's a common mistake is like people see like you like someone got their hand ripped off. The instinct is to want to put a tourniquet around like their wrist.
That's the exact mistake I would make.
And that's what people
instinctively.
make.
And then you twist it like that.
You twist it. You'll feel it get tighter.
And then you
lock it in. And so that's that's a CAT combat tourniquet, a combat application tourniquet, I believe is what CAT stands for.
Huh.
And so that's what we typically carry on all our deployments. They're probably the cheaper of the versions of the ones we get, but as long as you keep them out of the sun, they were pretty reliable. So yeah, it's not a hard thing to keep with you.
No.
But just know that it goes high up on single bones. So
I think I have a couple different first aid kits that I keep around in most of my vehicles. Like and I think one of them actually had like a plastic style tourniquet where it just kind of pulls tight.
yeah.
Nothing obviously like this, but it's part of it because I'm a kind of I would say weirdo, but I keep first aid kits in most of my places that I live because I keep one in my truck with me, buy my race car at all times. I keep one in the shop, and just first aid kits are important, people. It's like having a fire extinguisher.
Yeah, even like on the fishing boat, like, we always have it. And you just never know, because I've been driving down the road and I've seen a number of accidents I've responded to. And, we always say in medicine or like in our fields, like you only ever do what you know. So as much as we educate ourselves on these things, it's like, that's how we're going to respond.
Yeah.
And so it's important to constantly kind of improve and widen our knowledge, especially on medical stuff, because when the situation arises, you'll know what to do. So I'm going to give you this one, but
Dude, thank you.
So you can have that in case. I know you and Garrett,
Just
you guys get into some crazy things, so maybe you'll need one day. But for those of you who are watching on YouTube, I wanted to show like an improvised, because not everybody's going to have these like military grade CAT tourniquets. I mean, you could buy them online, let's be real.
Yeah.
But say you're in a situation where...
But you could own one and it not be with you when you need to use it.
Yeah.
Is the other part of it.
That's another big thing. So it's good to know how to make something. Like you see, it's like cinema all the time. You see in movies, like someone ranks off a belt and like they use it to turn. Like I've never seen one of those been able to get tight enough. You just can't do it with like a leather belt.
Interesting.
It's just too, because you're going to see what's going to have to happen. And so like some of movie medicine is just like, that's.
So are you saying Bruce Willis didn't do that over his pants and then still save the world?
You'd be amazed at how tight you have to get a tourniquet to actually stop bleeding.
You have to fully pinch off the
I mean,
veins.
I've been in the field and we've had to use like 2 or 3 on a single person and to actually get to work. So it's not like the movies like, oh, get down, pull your belt off, and it rips them out.
So
and puts it in the lowest belt notch, which is usually not there.
To touch on that this is not just you were taught this, you actually use these.
Yeah, so I've used them before.
Okay, so it's a crazy thought in itself to think that probably an IUD or something like that caused you to actually have to use one, and I hope they worked for those people.
That's something, like I said, sometimes they break on you. So like we always have the saying, one is none, 2 is 1. Mm-hmm. So for every single piece of equipment, I always make sure I have 2 or more.
Yeah.
Just because I always expect something to fail. And I think that's kind of carried into most of my things in life is always have a backup.
It's very like
car stuff.
Marine thing too, because what is it? It's like if you're on time, you're late.
Yeah, if you're on time, you're late. But yeah, for those of you who want to learn like a really simple, like correct way that you can put
like a nice scarf.
This, like, you can do this with just a piece of, you can tear a shirt just to get a piece of cloth. So if you find yourself in a situation where somebody cuts themselves pretty bad and they're bleeding pretty bad, and you need to tourniquet, like I said, an upper arm or an upper leg. It's like, even if it's the foot, it always goes high. So always high, because that's where you're going to get the best. But this is a scarf, which I got in Afghanistan and I carried with me most of the time. We use them as just like face wraps. But the way you're going to do this, and I'm going to come and show you, Cooper, on you.
You need me too. Here, I can kind of reach over.
Okay, so I was about to say, for sound purposes, I'm going to temporary break and show this, unless this will hold.
Yeah, it should.
All right, so I'm going to need this arm as best as possible.
Okay, we're back.
We're going to go for it?
Yes, let's see what this looks like
All
here.
Right. So this is...
We got stand-up microphones now.
We just consider this like field improvise.
Well, it's fine.
We still working?
The framing I was thinking, but your head is cut off a little bit.
Tell people problems. Yeah. So yeah, so just get me this bone as best you can. So all you're going to do, like you say, you tear a shirt, get a piece of cloth, get it to straight, and then loop it in half. So you're just going to go right there.
Okay.
So like I said, you can do this with a lot of things. bring it across. You're going to shove the 2 tail ends through the loop. And you're going to crank this down as best as like the angle's a little weird.
Oh, yeah.
So you want to get that as tight, and then you split your ends. And then you pull, and then you pull this back and you tie it together. And you can see how, like, I didn't even do it that hard, but you probably feel it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that's one way, like, you just split the ends,
Ow.
tie the end, and you basically set off circulation to Cooper's arm.
Yeah, I need that there.
Yeah, but that's just a piece of cloth you can
That's
do it with.
crazy.
So you're just working
No,
with,
I mean, you could definitely tell that would, like, if I had an injury from there down.
I mean, you're just working with the laws of, like...
What if, like, the injury is, like, right there? Do you go over it, basically?
Yeah,
Do you
when you're...
go over the injury?
No, when you get one, like those ones that we say are really like up there in the axial, like the pockets are the worst because you can't get a tourniquet in there. You just stuff it with as much gauze or packing material as possible. Like you would probably, even if this is all you had, you would just get your fingers in there. Try and like, it's not going to feel good, but you're packing the wound at that point.
Yeah. And what do you have for like a painkiller on you when you're in the field?
We would carry morphine in the field. Yeah. I'm trying to think what we have.
You guys would carry like some kind of like...
Oh, yeah, we have... Like morphine wasn't... I think when morphine kind of phased out, we were using fentanyl pops. So it was literally like a lollipop, for like fentanyl based, and they worked really well. So what you would do is you tape them to the guy's hand, and you just tell him to start sucking on it. So you tape it to his hand, he'd put it in his mouth, and he would suck on it, and eventually painkiller, and then they'd pass out. And it was a way to kind of regulate their dosage, because as soon as they pass out, it would fall out of their mouth, and they'd still have it taped to their hands, so you didn't have to worry about it. But then when the pain would come back, they'd wake up, and they'd start sucking on their fentanyl pop again.
Yeah, they wouldn't have to look for it or anything.
And they just pass out again. So it was like, we had those. That was one of them.
Yeah. So you did 2 tours.
Yeah.
And both times you were kind of the medical guy. Is it just one medical or is it 2?
So the first
trained people for medical?
Yeah, so I mean the first one, I was part of a shock trauma platoon. So like, have you ever seen the old show MASH, like where they like this forward surgical base? That was something that the Navy was trying, where they're putting basically surgical capabilities like right on the front lines, and so we'd set up these makeshift trauma bays, and we would just take on casualties. And so you just see casualties every day. We'd be treating Afghan soldiers, police, Taliban, like because you'd get those guys and you'd want to keep them alive to talk to them. And so we get them a lot. Americans, of course, but it's like the first deployment was a few foot patrols doing stuff with them, but mainly day-to-day traumas, like working sorts. Like that's when you really hone in on like a lot of those medical skills. Did CASEVAC, so where you'd fly patients from like the field to like the bigger hospitals. And that deployment just had a lot of different things to experience. We had a SEAL team that we were working with that we did their medical. So those guys were always rad. Like some of the most impressive professional military personnel you'll ever get to work with is the SEALs.
It's crazy to hear them talk.
Oh, they operate on such a different level, and they were always really good to me and always helpful, like teaching me their weapon systems, or like they got me qualified in like expeditionary warfare for like their stuff. So like really, really like the first deployment, pretty diverse. And then the second deployment, and then working with a team of medical personnel. The second one was with the Marines, and I was part of Combat Engineer Battalion, 1st Combat Engineers. And we would go out there and we'd support all the infantry units that were trying to move around in our AO. And we would just go in front, and we were just minesweepers. So we were just CB guys, combat engineers. We're looking for bombs. And so we would just drive around the country in front of other people and look for bombs. And this was, when you do that, sure, you deploy as a battalion, so 1st Combat Engineer Battalion. And then we start getting sent out with all the different, and like our companies start getting broken up to all the platoons. So I was Charlie Company 3rd Platoon, and then we would go to support, like say 1-7 was doing a raid on a house, or 1-9. And so we'd show up, or we'd send engineers to sweep with them, or we'd support their movements at night. And so we just kind of like, you kind of get sent out to support anybody who needs engineer support, primarily for just IED.
And now that would mostly be like by Humvee, or were you like flying in helicopters a lot? Were you in like...
That one was all...
What kind of hardware are we talking about on that deal?
So we had like old Marine Corps MRAPs, Like, you know, those up armored vehicles.
Yeah. Those are actually the good ones. The Humvees are pretty useless.
Yeah, the Humvees, they do not take much because, I mean, they get pretty wise. The Taliban knew pretty much what our vehicles could take and what they have to plant.
Don't really have any.
And you'd be amazed at how fast those guys were at planting bombs. Like you would have eyes on a road that was like 10 miles. Like we'd have these balloons that would keep eyes on roads for us and we'd clear them. But the second we cleared a road, within like, you know, it was already considered dangerous after you left it. So like you always had to assume, because they would be so good at coming in behind you, planting a new bomb, an IED, and then on your way home you'd hit it. It would happen that fast. And it did. It happened to us like on the same day. Like we'd drive one spot and then on the way back you'd be there. And you'd see the way they did it is they'd be in a bunch, like one of the ways, which just still blew my mind, is there was this one group of guys that were they were dressed up like shepherds. So they're just herding a big group of sheep around the field. And then they moved their sheep onto the road and they stopped there. And while the sheep were just hanging on the road, they were digging underneath the sheep, planted a bomb, and then they just moved away. So all you saw was a big herd of sheep that moved across the road. But in that time period, they planted and buried an IED and then moved on. So it just like it happens that quick. And in those situations when you're at the platoon level, so like I would be supporting 1-7, those guys, the Marines the infantry would have their own corpsmen, but I would be the only medical guy for my guys. So you pretty much acted solo on all the missions.
Well, that's what's interesting too, kind of on a different topic, is there's always this like, oh, you know, like regular civilians could never take on like a military. But like it's crazy because like we're seeing it in Ukraine where like, you know, just regular citizens are kind of like actually like, you know, fighting a battle.
They make a difference. Yeah,
they make a pretty big difference, especially with like the drones that they're using now and stuff. And like that debate always comes up in the gun control debate in the gun world of like, you know, citizens don't need military style weaponry.
I'll keep mine, thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
Keep mine.
But it's interesting to actually see. You saw firsthand of what a kind of a ragtag group of people with not like, I'm sure they didn't have crazy like
you just never really knew who you were fighting
direction like a military had. They were more just like
and it was tough. Like we had really like, you know, I think one of the hard things that people didn't realize for the Americans and the NATO forces over there is we had our hands like really heavily tied. Like if we couldn't shoot at somebody unless they shot at us. So we could have a guy that we like 100% sure he's Taliban walk in front of you with an AK. And if he didn't point the gun at you and pull the trigger, you couldn't do anything. So he could walk right up to you, you see him with the gun, and you couldn't do anything.
Even so who did those orders come from then?
Oh, just like the area command, like the AO commander from there. No. Same heat thing?
Yeah, but we have audio, so it's fine.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, the same thing. So like there was a time we'd get into a firefight and we watched the guy shooting at us and we were shooting back and then he set his gun down. We couldn't shoot back anymore. So it's kind of like once you say you're them, like, you know, put yourself in their position and they know you have to operate by these very strict guidelines, but they don't. And they know that they can come run at you real quick, take a pop shot, set their rifle down and then be like, whoa, 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 whoa. And you can't do anything. Yeah. It's like, that's not a war you can win. You can't.
It's not like a fair battle. It's not like a fair war.
Because we had to keep things so PC for so long because we were worried about a bad image, and you don't want to hurt anybody that's not involved.
Well, they'd use children and stuff too, which is like a whole crazy side of things.
It was so sad what was going on out there. Yeah, I mean, I don't think your listeners want to hear some of the nitty gritties, but
I'm sure some of them do, but maybe by and large they don't.
We'll keep it a little bit more because it's not positive.
There's plenty of movies that show a lot of that craziness of it. I mean, which one? The Sniper, American Sniper. It's a great one that shows some of what he was dealing with, and very true story, which is like a crazy one to watch. But yeah, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more in the next 10 years of what happened over there. It kind of takes a little while to come out. I mean, there's still World War II movies coming out.
So it's a war. Like there's nothing fun to talk about it. I just wish it never had to happen. So
yeah. Well, thank you for going over there and doing that. I mean, we can't really appreciate soldiers enough for that. And the sacrifice that you had to give is pretty crazy. And the fact that you so willingly went and did that is wild in itself. But
No, I appreciate it. It's one of those
Huge
things you
thank
don't
you for
get to
that.
talk about.
Yeah.
So I don't think I've talked about any of this deployment stuff in the last probably 8 years. So I know it's probably one of those topics that seem like kind of like taboo to a lot of people who probably weren't in, especially talking to veterans. But I think a lot of the guys and the girls who were over there would actually appreciate it if we were asked about some of this stuff. Because like I said, some people, I think it's like, I understand that a lot of people aren't going to be able to relate. Or they like, some of these are hard questions to ask. But I think there's certain things I know as veterans, like from the war in Afghanistan, Iraq, and others, there's certainly things I'm sure they don't want to talk about. Just from there. But I think there's also a level which when people don't ask, it's almost like it wasn't important. And like, it's like if nobody asked me about, because I would say my time in the Marine Corps was probably some of the most impactful 8 years of my life. Like some of the things I did and saw there changed me forever and were some of the best things I've ever done.
Yeah.
And so imagine doing that, and then for the rest of your life, nobody asks a question about it. Nobody gets to, you don't ever get to bring it back up because it's just like an awkward topic. But it's a very real thing, which I think just like, I hope people can understand it's okay to ask some questions. And actually, I think there are a lot of veterans that would appreciate when they're asked.
Yeah, not just like the typical thank you for your service, but actually like hear about what was going on. And I think that's important because for civilians to just kind of turn a blind eye to what happened and like not know anything about it and not know like, like Iraq and Afghanistan, and that's like the extent of it for the most part. Even me, like if you're not hearing firsthand stories, it's not really like the same as actually like hearing from someone like you that was there. Yeah, and the time that you spent there, I mean, that's a long time to be in a foreign country in a desert. I was going to ask about like the different countries that were involved. So you weren't able to shoot back, but like Canada was there.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Do they follow the same thing?
I think
because they don't have like, why would they listen to what the U.S. Congress says?
Who was it? It's I mean, like pretty much, like the Brits, the Canadians, the Americans, the Germans. A lot of us fell under pretty strict NATO regulations, but there were also these countries that were trying to come into NATO. Yeah. Like the Georgians, the Romanians, the Lithuanians. Some of them are, but some of them were not at the time. And I want to say it was the Slovakians. They operated by their own rules.
Oh, like really?
Some of the things, they did what they wanted to do. Like they probably fought a more like typical war. Like they were some of the most aggressive out there.
And would you guys be on a base with them?
Oh yeah, like some of my best friends these days.
So you guys share all share a U.S. Army base, a U.S. military base.
Yeah.
And everybody would be on that same base. So basically you'd have to like, the Slovakians that aren't part of NATO maybe have to pitch to the U.S. to be like allowed to be on the base with them, or they're just rogue soldiers.
Yeah. So I mean, like I said, I from my understanding, I say this like I know my perspective is limited. That the Romanians and the Georgians, and the Slovakians, they were over there because in order to join NATO, you have to do something. You can't just say I want in and not kind of do your part. So I think Afghanistan was an opportunity for them to be involved, support NATO, and then be able to be like, look, we supported, we were involved, now let us into NATO. And I don't know how that worked out for some of them. Like a lot of good friends now, because I worked a lot with the Romanians and Lithuanians and Georgians. Like I think I told you before, like one of my tours was just training Georgians in Germany before deploying. And just talk about like some fun crazy dudes, man.
Yeah.
Like, the Lithuanians, they would just sleep in vehicles, never have any home, and just wear cowboy hats and just ride around in the streets on dirt bikes. Like just doing some cowboy stuff. Like Lithuanians, they would. These are the SF guys. They would just. I remember like one guy was just riding around on a dirt bike and with a cowboy hat and just like chasing down like valuable like.
Well, it's interesting too because those are like they're Christian countries too. Like
what's
I think they're very like Christian partially, which is a very interesting thing for like a what do they call it? Like Central Europe or wherever they call that, or Western Europe, right?
Yeah. I think it's kind of
Western Europe countries. Yeah.
Those middle border countries.
Where they're all really close together there. Yeah, that's very interesting about those countries to begin with. you wouldn't think that, especially being so close to the Middle East, because they're only right on the other side of the coast.
They're right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, like that's and that's kind of interesting that comes up with the whole Ukraine thing, you know, all these kind of countries that existed on this border between like Western Europe and Russia. And a lot of these countries wanting to get into a NATO alliance probably because of like the Russian, like what's going on in Ukraine right now.
Yeah.
And so then we're seeing what's happening in Ukraine. So.
And people think like Russia's really big, but like most of it's right there.
Yeah.
Like 99% of the people are kind of like right
tucked on that one border.
Right on that one border. It's the same with Canada. Like most Canadians are like
they're not
right
up
on
in the northern
border.
end of the Arctic Circle.
Yeah. It's kind of an interesting like geographical sense of that. And I don't know how it is with the Middle East where they're at. Like, are they mostly, were you on like the coastline or were you by like?
So I was mainly in southern Afghanistan, the Helmand province, Sangin, those areas operating. So like that's where Camp Leatherneck was, where mainly all the Marines were. But you get on these bases, especially, I want to say it was Kandahar. I was there for like a little bit, kind of in and out. And like these things are like big melting pots of countries, man. Because you get on there and you've got, it's a cultural experience. Yeah, you get all these countries all living and eating in the same area. And, but yeah, it's primarily down south. Down in the valley area.
How is it with like equipment? Like would somebody from Romania show up and they have like some awesome firearms or maybe some like junk or maybe like some stuff you're like, dang, I'd like to have that. I'd like to have that sight.
Cooper, man, you're bringing up so many memories with these questions, man. You're good at this. No, that's, you would show up, like the Army always had tons of money. You'd show up and as a Marines, we're always getting hand-me-downs. So we're getting vehicles that were used previously. It was always kind of nerve-wracking because those MRAPs could only really take like one major blast, and then the second one would be like devastating. So like you look at this really expensive piece of equipment, if it was hit once and like you knew your truck had been hit before, kind of repaired, the second time the structural integrity of the hull was not there. And so you're always kind of worried to be like, you didn't want a hand-me-down that had been hit before, but at that point it's pretty much all of them. So the Marines had all these hand-me-down, beat up, blown up, repaired trucks. Just the Marines like to say, they always deal with like worse.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, the Army had similar situations with some of them. So like, I have to give respect to some of the Army guys because like they definitely had some janky gear as well. But then some of the Army would show up, or like the Air Force would be doing something, and they'd have these giant, what were their big vehicles there? They had a crazier, like an upgraded version of the MRAP. Not MATVs. To come to me eventually, but they would hop out of their trucks and they had like a ladder that stepped down. They could go down the stairs. It's like all electronic, all bougie. And then they'd set like, we'd be sleeping on the ground with like just our tarps. And then they would have these cots. I kid you not. I was trying to figure out how I could get one from them because they only used them like once or twice on their whole deployment. It was like a cot that, like a race cot, and it had a tent that opened up over the top of it. It had a small like little AC system built into it. So it had like a little, like you turn a fan on, so like they'd get air in there. I'm like, and it had little steps that like you'd step up into it. So when you're getting out of it, and like you're laying on the ground and they're sleeping in these raised canopy beds with like stairs, so you didn't have to get your boots dirty when you're getting out. I was like, that is some bougie stuff.
Yeah.
And then for weapons and things like that, you're of course like, we had our typical setups that we bring from home, our M4s and all those, but the Lithuanians, they always had like fun, like G30s. They always had like fun.
Well, because a lot of firearms are built over there.
Yeah,
like a lot of the good stuff is like from that area.
Yeah, those guys would show up with some cool setups, like MP5s, G36s, and they'd let you shoot them. But then the Afghan army, my gosh, I don't know how they hit anything. Like AKs, they're so much more accurate than people give credit for. An AK is probably one of the best like rifles out there. Like they're very accurate, very reliable. But that's pretty much what they have. So like when you get these images of like movies where they're just like spraying, like that's how some of them shoot. But when used properly, those things are incredibly accurate. But like the ones our guys would get, so like our Afghan police or Afghan army, we'd go to the ranges with them, and their like butt stocks would be taped on with duct tape. Their sights would be like loose.
Oh, gosh.
It's like the whole weapon was falling apart,
Yeah.
And like, no kidding, not going to hit anything. And it's just like, as you shoot, the whole thing's like wobbling apart. So yeah,
terrifying.
the Afghans had some pretty janky stuff, but I'm pretty sure by the end, the Afghan army, they looked like they got a pretty decent amount of gear and like new rifles. And
Yeah.
by the time we left, it wasn't the same Afghan looking army that I saw when we were working with them.
Yeah, quite a few things were left behind in those countries at this point.
So sad. Like,
Yeah. I freaking saw dogs were being left behind.
So yeah, for you, what was your perspective on like the way it ended? Like, I know like,
Well,
it's interesting kind of hearing from,
I don't know, because like there was never like an end really. It kind of just like it fizzled out more than like it ended, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like when other wars ended, I feel like they ended with like a treaty was signed. Like if you look back on history, like treaties were signed for wars, or like we pulled out of Vietnam. Like it was a hard, like it's over.
Yeah.
And like even in Japan, like treaties were signed in World War II.
Right. Hard end to it.
A hard end, like a date.
With like a
victory. You have a date for those to end. But like I don't feel like that with these. I feel like it just kind of like wait till the news cycle stops talking about it end.
Yeah.
And that's how I felt about it.
Yeah, I would say I'm always curious about kind of like from someone's perspective outside the military, like the way they watched all that unfold. Like what's their impression on the military and like how it was handled.
I never felt that there was like a true outlined goal.
Yeah.
Like it felt like at first it was like, oh, Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein, like we got to get them out. And then they were gone. And then it was kind of just still like rolling. And it was like, oh, now we're bringing freedom. And it was like, well, they kind of had freedom before, like in the 80s, they had a lot of freedom, and then things changed. I don't know. I never really fully saw like a big picture of like what was the long-term goal. Yeah. And that always kind of surprised me.
Yeah, it was a tough way to watch the way that all kind of came to a close. Yeah, but it was.
Yeah, it was sad.
But I think you're right. There was. As time went on, you kind of have to start asking yourself, like, what is our role here? Like, do we really have a mission to like to actually be here? Or at this point, should things be handed over to this country to manage itself, you know? And
I think there was probably at some point somebody said, this country will not manage itself. The Afghan army will not be able to take the reins from us. So what do you do then?
Yeah.
You have so much time and money invested.
Yeah. What do you cut your losses and?
Yeah, that's where it's tough. Like, how do you feel about that? Like, do you feel like we should have still been there in a stronger force? And maybe if we were there in a stronger force, it would be safer for everyone there, all the soldiers and stuff.
Yeah, this is a really tough topic because it's like if it would have ended differently, I think there would have been different opinions on everything, you know. Because it's one of those things like your goal is not to be there forever. And we don't have the resources. It's not our role to sit there and help a country keep its democracy and freedoms for the people. We helped get that set up. And then at some point you have to hand things over. So like, and we spent years and years training the Afghan army and doing all this stuff and like really building infrastructure. And there was going to come a point when it had to go to them. And I think obviously there's a lot of other factors that are happening within the Afghan army and the police, and that probably resulted in the quick fall that it did. And that's a conversation we could have a easy 2-3 hour talk about. Cause there's like, obviously this isn't a very simple thing, but there's a point we had to just leave, and you'd hope that you had trained folks, but there was obviously some other things at play that.
I think when you think about it, mostly you think about like the fumbles along the way, like things like Benghazi, where obviously that was in the Middle East, but it wasn't exactly the same. But like those kind of like fumbles of leadership come to mind more often than like there was no like publicity of like small victories of any sort. It feels like Osama bin Laden was one, but that was, he was already pretty much doing nothing at that time anyways. Saddam Hussein was one, but that was pretty much right off the kick.
Yeah, I think a lot of us, especially like the guys and girls that were like you said, that were over there, I think that one of the things that hurts the most is just like how we left a lot of people high and dry out there. Like our interpreters, like these are people, a lot of them, these are guys that we became very close to, like very friends. We have each other's numbers, and like They stayed there and they really put their lives on the line, like risked it, them and their families, to actually work with the NATO forces and support. And so they were given a promise, that we would help get them visas and stuff to get out of the country. Because the second we leave, these dudes were dead. Like they were going to be hunted down.
They knew that they were working with
the fact that we started denying these guys visas who had done their parts was probably one of it was like the guys and girls that went over there and served, they were like, we had this promise and we were supporting, we had these other people working with us and we promised them these things. And so when we pulled out and we didn't fulfill that promise as crappy as it all ended and as tough as that all was to watch, especially having been there and lost friends over there, to know that we couldn't at least fulfill the agreement to the people who worked with us was like just a last knife in their back, for it all. It's like we should have at least, before we made that hasty pullout, gotten all of our interpreters out there that we had agreements with. And now, right now, it's almost impossible. All the guys I knew, they were like scrambling to get their interpreters out, and they had to do it with like private funded contractors and things. Like you couldn't rely on the government that said they were going to do it. And it's like almost like they were just trying to hope that there was going to be this really bad window of what happened, and they're going to hope people just forgot about it. Like the media would stop talking about it. This would just become like a poor moment in history.
Yep.
And then we would just kind of ignore it and pretend like it never happened.
I would hope that NATO's job would have taken over from there at least.
Yeah.
It seems like that's exactly a NATO thing that they should be doing.
To have I get what you're saying, yeah.
Okay, the U.S. Army helped enough. Now NATO, which is 80% U.S. Army, 80% U.S. soldiers, could take it from there and keep the peace. I mean, Afghanistan is kind of a tough one because
look at its history.
Russia tried.
Yeah.
I mean, there's Russian tanks sitting around in the desert, I think, still.
Yep.
I'm sure you felt some historic Russian presence there.
Also, like I said, one of the bases I was sat next to Alexander the Great's, one of his little castles.
Oh, yeah.
So you look at, there's history there from back to the Alexander the Great.
And many people tried to get in there and just nobody could.
So I know at the end of it, it looks like, man, America, we played a huge role in this and we were giving way more than everybody else. And it's just not sustainable,
Yeah, the whole weapons of mass destruction thing was questionable.
Man, more talks, man. We could go on this one.
I know. I have a lot of interest in this kind of stuff.
Yeah, if the audience wants to do a second podcast where we just talk on this, give us a thumbs up and we'll dig deeper.
Well, even we could go deeper than that because I know you have World War II history knowledge that you're really passionate about. And you said you were on the beaches in France and Normandy, right?
We're a lot of the sites. Actually, I haven't actually made it to Normandy Beach yet.
Okay.
There's part of Holdfast with the artwork that I really want to be intentional with is just retelling military heritage and history. Because, as we move forward and as we move forward, I just always want to be intentional that you're kind of retelling those stories. And it's part of a generational responsibility to help carry like the stories of those who've gone before us and the sacrifice and the history and the major locations forward. Especially for the Marine Corps, heritage and history is really important. And with the artwork I do, I feel like that's just one way I can connect with the history and kind of retell it through my artwork. And with the hopes of one day Holdfast being able to do these trips where we go to some of these historic locations. And some of them I've been to, not Normandy yet, not D-Day, not that beach yet, but we'd like to start doing a project, referring to it right now as like the Military Art Heritage Project, where we basically send a bunch of artists, not just like painters, but say it's photographers, videographers, who have different backgrounds. And we take them to some of these significant military historic sites. And we just kind of interact with them and create content that can really help communicate those historic stories to like this generation to go forward. So in some small capacity, just being intentional about being storytellers.
Well,
and
history is a weird one too, because I always look at history of like, okay, but whose retelling of the story is this? How, like, history is written by the victors
the perspective
for a reason. And it's all very like, as I get older, I realize you got to look at things a little differently, because as I live through things, I realize how they're going to look in 5 years. Like as you live through historical events, you're like, wait, my kids might not hear about this the same way that I actually lived through it, like 2020 and stuff like that. Like it may be told very skewed in
Very
history
skewed.
books. Same with like Afghan and Iraq. Like it may be told way differently than what you saw in 5 years. I mean, I spent some time with my uncle who went through Vietnam.
Yeah.
And that is told in 5 different ways. And especially if you're a Vietnamese person, it's told very differently. So it's like, I get very skeptical on the telling of history.
Yeah.
And as it goes farther back, you realize how much more skewed it could be.
Yep.
But that gets a little bit conspiratorial.
Yeah, that's. I mean, but I mean, you're 100% right though. Like, there's our perspective, our angle, and all it all influences our opinion and the way we tell it. You know, it's like you look at like the Taliban. You know, you got these young guys fighting you, and you can't help but kind of understand why. Like, had you imagine being a young kid growing up in Afghanistan, being taught like one thing your whole life, and that's how you're going to grow up thinking, and then of course you're going to go fight the Americans, you know, or you're going to go like, that's your life. And it's like when you're funneled into that mind and that environment, and you've grown, like, you know, we were in Afghanistan for 20 years. There was enough time for somebody to be born, watch maybe their dad get killed, grow up and be a firefighting, like be of age to firefight or be a fighter. It's like, I'm not surprised. Like you're fighting generations at that point.
Well, there's people that weren't even born before the U.S. got there. And they were born into a place of just
conflict.
No peace whatsoever. That's crazy. That's absolutely wild to think about.
I mean, you see, it's like an ideology. It's more than just a fight. Like there's so much more, like a belief and a core.
Yeah.
Like that's why we had fighters coming from all over the country to fight us, like all over that area, like Pakistan. I think fighters were pouring in that country just so that they could participate, like the jihad, you know, the whole, like the war against the West. And so it was a very deep spiritual thing for them to be fighting. So it's like I said, well, imagine their perspective at all.
To end this off a little bit more lighthearted.
The coffee was good. It kept me up.
The coffee was great. Let's end this a little bit more lighthearted with some more interesting talk. This is actually connects to you a lot. So the Navy has been talking a lot about aliens.
Oh,
and they're talking about them being in the water.
I'm seeing a little bit of this now. Okay,
but they're talking about them being in the water, in the ocean.
You might have to educate me more on this, Cooper.
It's just interesting because it's like it's oceanic research, military, and it seems like something you would be almost called in on.
This is like very recent stuff, right?
This is like week.
This is something like I've seen this stuff popping up, and I mean I haven't.
But they're saying that, like, you know, they'll follow the spacecraft or unidentified flying object, whatever, UAP they call them now or something.
Oh, yeah, we got a new name for them.
And then they'll just drop into the water, descend like 5,000 feet a second, and then just like, blop, and gone.
I mean, imagine the ocean. Like we were talking before, the ocean is considered 97% unexplored.
Yeah.
And there's parts of the ocean. It's easier to get to the moon than some of the deepest parts of the ocean.
And probably all the explored stuff is coastline.
Right. So we're pretty limited on what we can actually see. So like, would it be unfathomable for something to drop in the ocean, go to some of the deepest parts and we never see it? Yeah, probably. Pacific Ocean's pretty big. Yeah. You know?
Yeah, there's spots. I think there's one spot in the Pacific Ocean, what do they call it? The Nemo Point, where you're closer to the International Space Station than you are any other land.
The Nemo Point?
Something like that.
I don't know if this one.
Well, it's like in the middle of the Pacific Ocean where the space station is closer to you when it goes by than anything else around you.
Interesting.
Than any other piece of land.
I gotta look. Yeah, I'll have to look in this. I've never heard
something
of the
like
Nemo
that. But
so you're saying the Navy knows about some.
They said that they followed them in planes and stuff, and then they've watched them drop into the water. So that sounds like something of research to you, but it sounds like you already know something and you just can't tell me.
Oh yeah, because you know me and the Navy, we're such good friends. We hang out a lot.
I understand if people can't tell me stuff.
You also got to remember, like,
that can't.
I've never been on a ship.
Yeah.
I never wore a Navy uniform my entire time. I literally was in Marine Corps. Mm-hmm. It's the weirdest thing. People have been like, so you were in the military? It's like, I was in the Navy. And they're like, oh, just the Navy. And
did you hear, there's like a study that recently came out that everybody that spent time on a Navy ship, like 99%, have daughters.
I got a daughter, but I was never on a ship.
But like, it's like a thing. They're like, what is the ship?
The ship just mutated.
Have putting out that
influencing those.
Yeah, I was like, oh, that's an interesting one.
But yeah, so wait, tell me more about what's the most recent thing you've heard about as far as.
Well, now there was a whistleblower that just came out like a week ago, which is questionable in itself because if you're a whistleblower, you have to clear it with the company that you're whistleblowing against. So like he was a researcher for this stuff, but he had to like get the okay to be a whistleblower, I guess. Because if you're just a whistleblower because you want to be, then you end up like Julian Assange and you're in hiding in, I don't know where he's in like London right now in like a whistleblower.
Yeah,
whatever.
Not in the U.S.
like
hanging out.
Yes, you end up like a whistleblower. They're actually probably going to extradite him back to the U.S., Julian Assange, in the next few months. I mean, he came out with a lot of stuff against what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yeah.
I think he had like 80,000 documents about all kinds of crazy stuff. But regardless, there was a whistleblower about like all kinds of different stuff. And he says that they have crafts, they have bodies, they have everything.
Would I be surprised? No. Like, I mean, obviously I'm not high up Navy.
Yeah.
I was never really on ships out there, but like, do I think there's a lot of stuff that's not being told to us? Oh yeah. Like, yeah.
I didn't know if you had seen anything crazy. I know that once like nuclear talk starts to pop up a little bit more, it starts to become more prevalent that they see things. Like they said after World War II, the amount of sightings like rose drastically because people suspect that we have like now this technology that can destroy ourselves.
Yeah.
So now they're like intervening, like the guy with the octopus. Once the shark comes in, that's when he intervenes.
Because he has to play a role in stopping us from.
Yeah, because we're too stupid.
Yeah. These silly humans.
Yeah, I don't know. Just thought that was fun, but we'll end it off there. We've been going for a while.
Well, I hope there's something out there because it would make things a lot more interesting.
It'd be cool.
It would be really cool.
Be cool.
So I'm rooting for it.
Yep.
I'm not hoping it's not there.
All right. Well, we'll end this off. They can follow you at the Hold Fast Collective to see some of your art. Go check it out, guys. I hope to have you back on once you have some more research to tell us, maybe.
Yeah, man. We'll see how the next couple weeks go. A lot could change.
We're going to get a drift car this week. But
we'll start shredding some tires here pretty soon.
Yep.
Or I'll be bugging Cooper for more help on the car.
Exactly. All right, guys. That'll do it. Thank you so much for watching.
And
we'll see you next time.
Cooper, brother. Till next time. So that's a site where like you can kind of see how the reef was damaged by like they dropped a piece of dynamite on the reef and then blew it so that they could just like kill all the fish and they float to the surface. But you know, that's what it looks like when you just blow a reef up.
I didn't even get to ask you about all the nuclear bomb testing in the water.
Oh, don't get me started on nuclear bomb testing.
I mean, we tested them all in the ocean, which seems questionable.
You think that killed some stuff?
Yeah. Then they were like, maybe we should try them in the
long-term
desert.
Radiation?
Yeah, like Bikini Atoll and stuff like that. They said that's the conspiracy behind SpongeBob.
Bikini Atoll?
Yeah, it's Bikini Bottom where they test nuclear radiation.
And there's all these like
and there's all these
talking now.
Yeah. Kind of makes sense.